Hello and welcome to the Sci Guys, the show where we talk about the crazy, weird, and wonderful stories from the science world. I'm Corey, and as always, I'm joined by my co-hosts, Jamp, Luke Cutforth, and the fifth Sci Guy, NoahFinnce.
Number 4, fourth Sci Guy.
This week we're talking about Dysphoria.
Feeble attempt.
But first, we have to thank all of our patrons, not just the new ones. We have to thank every single patron that supports us because they voted this topic in. Head over to patreon.com/Sci Guys to join and get a whole bunch of perks. But before you do that, we have a question. So head over to YouTube, get down to the comments and answer this question. The question is, when did you start watching Sci Guys? Or when did you start listening to Sci Guys? When did Sci Guys come into your life? When did it come into your life?
I've never actually watched Sci
3
Guys.
years ago.
3 years ago.
It was when you
it came
took
into my
my
life 3 years.
room.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Took my whole room.
Whoops, sorry about that.
And then climbed on the roof and didn't let me climb on the roof.
That's so
we
true.
recorded the first episodes of Sci Guys in Noah's bedroom.
Now we're recording it in a studio. Little Sci Guy studio.
that's
Isn't that
nice,
nice? But it has been 3 years of Sci Guys. That's why we're wearing these little party hats here. If you're listening, you can't see it, but now you know we're wearing party hats. It's very festive, very fun. But as I said up top, dysphoria was voted as this month's topic. So I assumed that they were talking about gender dysphoria, because that's the main dysphoria that everyone talks about.
Yeah.
We've touched on it in the past, and it's always fun to revisit things that we've done before.
Yeah, we've dabbled.
Yeah, we've dabbled.
Yeah.
We've dabbled in some
Yeah.
dysphoria. You know.
Ah, me too.
Some of us.
But now that everyone is definitely here on YouTube and they've noticed all of this celebratory decoration, I want to point out again that this is not for the episode topic. This is for the fact that we've been doing this for 3 years. We're not celebrating dysphoria.
Oh,
Yeah.
good
Well,
disclaimer.
it doesn't say congratulations, does it? It says happy birthday.
Yeah, that could be a little bit. I don't know. That could be a little bit.
Happy birthday,
No room for
dysphoria.
misunderstanding, please.
So first off, what is dysphoria? Does anyone know what dysphoria is? Anyone at this table know what dysphoria is?
It is a feeling of discomfort. And in the context of gender dysphoria, usually into discomfort with your gender presentation.
Wow. Yeah, spot on. Good job.
Is dysphoria just any discomfort whatsoever?
Dysphoria means a state of unease or generalized dissatisfaction with life, and that is from the Oxford English Dictionary. Or rather, it is from Google, who I think takes it from Oxford. I don't know how it works.
They can.
Have you sourced Google in the below?
No, just everyone knows that I use Google.
Yeah, who
but
said
it comes from the
Google?
Greek, dysphoros, which means hard to bear.
Oh.
And we obviously often use it to reference gender dysphoria, which is what we're talking about today.
Yes.
So what is gender dysphoria?
That, but for gender.
Yeah. So from the NHS, gender dysphoria is a term that describes a sense of unease that a person may have because of a mismatch between their biological sex and their gender identity. So first we need to cover gender and sex. It's very easy to forget that a lot of people don't think that there's a difference or even know that other people draw a distinction between the two. But obviously, if you agree that transgender people exist, then you agree that gender and sex are not the same thing. They're not.
No.
Yeah.
They have to be different.
They have to be.
Yeah.
They have to be different. Otherwise, trans people don't exist. And they definitely do. Look, we brought one here. We brought one for you.
Hi.
See?
Shut up.
I don't know, man. I can't see anything sat in that chair. I don't think. I think you're imagining it.
So, first off, what are sex and gender and how are they different? What is sex? Does anyone know what sex is?
Ooh.
Well,
Is
none
it-
of you have had it,
it's-
so
it's-
I'll explain. Sex describes physical characteristics, so your chromosomes, hormones, primary sex characteristics, and your secondary sex characteristics. Your primary sex characteristics are your sort of genitals, but the ones that are directly involved in reproduction. And your secondary ones are the ones that aren't directly involved in reproduction, so breasts, body hair, like a deep voice, that sort of thing. Yeah? Yeah?
Yeah.
Good. So sex is often thought of as being binary, but that's not quite right. If you want to know more, we do have videos on the topic. You can click up the top corner if you're on YouTube to see that, or perhaps in the description if you're listening elsewhere. We've got videos about that on YouTube. Essentially, if we're being incredibly simple, sex is how we describe a collection of physical characteristics that are all related to each other. Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
We're all happy with that?
I'm so happy with that.
Does anyone want to define gender? Because I don't want to try that one. I don't want to tackle that.
No.
Anyone?
I will describe it in the way that I understand it, but it might be wrong. So that'll be fun if it's wrong, in which case we can all learn.
Educating Luke.
So I would say, okay, so this is probably wrong. So I think that you've got your brain, and your brain has like got an idea of itself and what it is, and like its identity inside of it, like almost like a database. Like name, Noah.
Pronouns.
Pronouns, he, him.
Pronouns are stored in the brain.
Yeah.
Noah.
and part of that is your identity, right? Like who you believe yourself to be, because you're actually like a collection of cells pretending to be a person. And so
I don't know if that's a universal experience or if that's just Luke.
I'm a collection of cells in a trench coat.
Stacked up
Just
on
trying to
each
get
other.
into a 15 in the movies. Anyway, so you've got like your identity, which is like almost like a data structure, like a set of information, and part of that is how you identify in terms of your like role, traditionally your gender role, and your like who you believe yourself to be, and how you identify, and what other people you identify with in the sense of gender. And sometimes that doesn't match up with what people tell you should have based on what's between your legs. There you go. Is that
Sure. I mean,
Yeah.
what I've got is that gender is essentially an internal sense of identity. That's as deep into it as I want to go.
Oh, I want to go much deeper. That's good.
Because it's not. I mean, it's not super important to understand exactly how to define gender for this right now, if that makes sense. Because there's lots of different aspects and facets to gender, and we've done an episode on gender before, which you can go and watch. So go and figure it out from there. We're not going to spend all of this episode covering that. But the one main thing to know is that for most people, sex and gender align. If you're male, you're a man, for example, which is why it's very easy to conflate the two, which is why a lot of people think that they're the same thing when they are pretty categorically not, right?
Yeah.
But gender dysphoria, as we've said, is the sort of unease or dissatisfaction that some people have with the mismatch between those two things. It's essentially one of the main reasons that people transition, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Good. So I want to do the history of gender dysphoria next, and gender identity disorder, but that would take too long. So that's going to be its own episode if you want. So if you want to see us do an episode on gender dysphoria and the history of gender identity disorder, then ask us for that in the comments, or message us, or do anything, because we're not doing it here. So how common is gender dysphoria? Anyone want to take a guess?
Not very.
Quite.
A
But
few
more.
percent.
We don't
More than you
really know.
Ooh.
It's hard to know how common it is, because not all people that have gender dysphoria would necessarily get support from the NHS, and that's from the NHS themselves. They literally said no one really knows, because not all people who have a sense of unease about their identity or already identify as gender diverse need or ask for support from the NHS.
It's also like it's a thing that not just trans people experience as well.
Exactly.
Like some people just don't feel like, I know in like the lesbian community, it's a lot. There's a lot of like lesbians with gender dysphoria, because like their place in the world is probably like not as mapped out as like other identities.
Like the thing Jamie was it Jamie talked sexual scripting theory?
No, so that
Ian.
was Ian.
Ian,
So
yeah.
they mentioned that. I've got a quote here from the Royal College of Psychiatrists as well, saying gender variance is not uncommon. A survey of 10,000 people undertaken in 2012 by the Equality and Human Rights Commission found that 1% of the population was gender variant to some extent. But that doesn't necessarily. They go on to then say that it doesn't necessarily mean that it's representative of the whole population. And also they kind of bring up that it used to be trans women that were more common, and it's now seeming that more trans men are looking for treatment now, which is interesting. But then apparently those numbers are pretty much close to being equal now, whereas before it was quite unequal.
Yeah.
That's apparently what they're saying. Could be 0.5 to 1.3% of people based on a sex health study published in 2017. According to a national survey, 0.6% of Americans identify as trans. So that's 1.4 million people.
Wow.
It's really hard to get hard numbers on this, because, I mean, as you've said, Noah,
Yeah.
you don't know if someone is, if you've got gender dysphoria, it doesn't mean that you're trans. And not all trans people would have gender dysphoria, so it's very difficult to find exact numbers and then use those numbers to mean something else.
Because it's self-reported, isn't it?
Yeah,
And
like
you have to understand what gender dysphoria is.
Yeah, it's also the
Yeah.
kind of thing that like there's probably like thousands of like trans kids out there that are just like really confused.
Yeah.
That have like no idea and would have
But-
no
yeah.
option to go and speak to somebody
They don't
about
have the
it.
language to describe
Yeah.
what they're feeling.
So in the UK, 8,000 people were referred to the adults sort of gender services in the sort of 2018 to 2019 period. But that number is very misleading, because when you try to use it to understand anything else, it doesn't really work for a few reasons. One, the number of those people that were referred, weren't necessarily diagnosed with gender dysphoria. Two, the people with gender dysphoria like people with gender dysphoria, not all of them might look for support from the NHS. And 3, that doesn't mean that the people that went to this are all trans, right? So you can't use it to say how many trans people are there in the UK. You can't use it to say how many people with gender dysphoria are there in the UK. You can't use it to understand any other. All this means is that there were 8,000 people that were referred to the adult services.
Yeah.
Just referrals.
Yeah, just referrals, right? And a referral doesn't mean a diagnosis or anything. That just means that you said to your GP, I think you've either referred yourself or you've said to your GP, refer me.
You have to say refer me.
Yeah.
You don't just go and be like, I'm confused because they don't know what to do.
No, exactly.
We
So
had
you
like
need to be
speak
asked.
them through it when I went.
Really?
Like, yeah, oh god, yeah. We literally like, there are so many like groups online and like forums online with like specific lines of things that you should say to your GP to get you referred to those services. Because a lot of the time, like they don't have training, they don't know what they're supposed to be doing to it. So I literally went with my mum and she had to like speak them through everything.
So why don't we train some GPs now by going through the signs of gender dysphoria?
Any GPs listening? I hope so. That'd be quite fun.
And this is from the NHS website as well. So I've got a lot of this from a lot of different places. Most of this is going to be based on the UK.
Yeah.
But from the NHS, they say that people with gender dysphoria might have changed their appearance, their behaviour, or their interests. They show signs of discomfort or distress, including low self-esteem, becoming withdrawn or socially isolated, depression or anxiety, taking unnecessary risks, and neglecting themselves. Wow, Noah, 4 out of 5. Good for you.
Wait.
Which one doesn't
one
he?
does not?
Taking unnecessary risks.
Yeah.
He's a musician. That's quite risky.
Oh no,
Oh,
none of these now. This was before.
This was before.
Oh,
Also,
okay.
these are all just like very vague symptoms
incredibly
of
vague.
literally any disorder.
Yeah, that could apply to a lot. Of
Right?
And if you have gender dysphoria, you might feel certain that your gender identity conflicts with your biological sex, comfortable only when in the gender role of your preferred gender identity, may include non-binary. A strong desire to hide or be rid of physical signs of your biological sex, such as breasts or facial hair. A strong dislike of the genitals of your biological sex. This, I feel, this is almost misleading because it doesn't just refer to your genitals, it refers to genitals in general, which could also
yeah,
be the
just
case.
a dislike of.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say it.
Wait,
do
so
that.
that's really interesting though. So that's in part why it's so, because there's so much stuff in the news about changing rooms and stuff. And if that is a thing where it's like
I think that's just ambiguous wording on the NHS.
oh, okay, but that could be a very good reason why somebody who's difficult about trans people using their preferred changing room could be sort of brought round with the information that it's actually very distressing to be in the changing room that for your assigned sex. Like that's a yeah.
I don't think that'd
It's-
bring anyone round.
No, okay. Maybe it wouldn't bring them round, but it at least is something concrete that you can talk to them about. Where it's like, so what would you propose is a solution to that? Am I assigning rationality to something that's not rational?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I think it's just, it was like worded badly.
So you could also feel lonely or isolated from others as well. And you might also face pressure from friends, classmates, or workmates, or family to behave in a certain way, or bullying and harassment for being different.
I had a ceramics teacher who was very conservative and traditional, who told me that it wasn't very ladylike to eat with my fork in my right hand. So she made me switch them around and made all my friends leave the table until I finished eating in a way that like I didn't eat, because she said it wasn't ladylike.
I don't think that's gender related though, is
Yeah,
it
that's-
really?
No.
Yeah, but is
Yeah,
it like,
why
is
is
that not
lady-
just...
ladylike?
eating with your fork in your...
Yeah, no, I don't know why it's not ladylike. She
That's
was like,
weird.
it's really weird. Literally everything I did, she was like, that's not very ladylike. I was like, yeah.
I don't care.
Yeah, I'm like 10. Like, leave me alone. I'm not even a woman. Even if
very
I was
childlike.
I'm not old enough to be a woman. Like,
So children are a little different, usually because it's not as often diagnosed in kids, because kids are odd. But kids are odd if you don't understand them, shall I say. They often role play and they'll play with gender. They start understanding it around the ages of sort of 3 to, I think, 7-ish. That's when they start to get a sort of concept of gender. And just because a kid is doing stuff that you might look at them and think, oh, wow, they don't want to be the gender they are. That's not necessarily the case. They could just the kids are, they're free. They do whatever.
Everyone put on their mum's heels, right? It's just fun.
yeah. And I wanted to be a dog when I was like
Did I
4.
out myself?
I don't think wanting to be a dog when you're 4 means that you're a dog either.
Well,
I wanted to be a dog real
People might
bad.
disagree.
Well, that's a proper turf argument right there, isn't it?
I grew out of the phase.
So I want to be clear though, that it doesn't mean that kids can't have dysphoria or be trans.
Yeah.
It's just pointing out that not all apparently non-normative gender expression in children is gender dysphoria. And a quote from the NHS: "Children may show an interest in clothes or toys that society tells us are more often associated with the opposite gender. They may be unhappy with their physical sex characteristics. However, this type of behavior is reasonably common in childhood and is part of growing up. Doesn't mean that all children behaving this way have gender dysphoria or other gender identity issues." There are some sort of facts and things in here that I was almost hesitant to include. And that really made me think, well, I definitely need to include them because I'm hesitant to include them.
Yeah.
Not because they were they go against like sort of my beliefs. More that I know exactly how people that disagree with us would take them out of context to try and use them against trans people. For example, this one here, that a lot of kids could sort of be non-normative in play with gender. A lot of transphobes would say, "Oh, well, that means that's just what all kids are," and there aren't. No, they're trans
and
people.
you should dismiss all signs that they're trans.
Yeah. Like kids can have gender dysphoria. Kids can be trans. Just because not all kids that like might appear to be that. You know what I mean? Like, just stop trying to make it out as though trans people don't exist, or stop trying to make it out as though there are true trans people that exist, but anyone that you meet is not one of them.
Yeah.
Because that's the key.
I feel like it also depends on the extent of it, right? Like, playing a boy in like dress up and being like a husband is not the same as like packing when you're like 5.
Yeah.
Before you understand what a penis is.
I made Play-Doh dicks and then put them in my pants and then told people in the playground that my name was Alex and I was a boy. And then we'd play Kiss Chase. And
this is interesting. So according to the DSM-5, the rates of gender dysphoria continuing into adolescence or adulthood, it varies. So if you're AMAB or assigned male at birth, it's ranged from 2 to 30%. And that's I know, right?
That's no.
This is
either 2% or like a third.
This is from the NHS. And in assigned females, if assigned female at birth, AFAB, this is ranged from 12 to 50%. 50, 12 to 50. Yeah, no, and then it says, "It's clear for the majority of gender-confused boys and girls, gender dysphoria persists over time as they enter adolescence." I don't know. This is from the NHS.
Yeah.
50?
Yeah.
50?
Look, and what I want to say here is that it's quite clear that when you start looking at the studies and stuff where these numbers are taken from, they're all over the place. Yeah. Really, I mean, this is why I wanted to do an episode entirely on the history of gender dysphoria, because it used to be gender identity disorder, and a little bit before that, it was lumped in with all of these other different sort of sexually deviant disorders. You know, like being a transvestite and dressing up in the wrong kind of clothing, and all of these other things. They were all lumped in sort of in one sort of big thing. And so I find that when you look at the studies that sort of look at rates of sort of gender dysphoria sort of leaving in adolescence, you've got a lot of confounding factors that make it very difficult to see who should have been diagnosed with gender dysphoria and who was just like non-normative, or whether someone desisted because of a non-supportive environment. Because we could say all of this, but what is clear is that the best thing to do for kids, regardless of whether they're trans or not, or regardless of whether they've got gender dysphoria or not, is that if they're happy, just let them explore their gender expression, right? But the NHS does say that if your kid is unhappy or like has is depressed or anxious or withdrawn, take them to see a doctor, right? So if your kid,
no, that's so insane.
Let's say you're a parent, right, and you have a small child, and you think your child is a boy, but this boy likes wearing dresses. Is he happy? Fine, that's cool. Just let him do. Yeah. Let him do whatever, right?
Yeah.
Now, if he starts seeming depressed and anxious and all that stuff, take him to a doctor and figure it out.
Yeah.
Right. My point here is that TERS will often take this stuff and say, "Aha, you see, trans people don't exist. Aha, you see, it's a cult. Aha, you see, they're no, shut up. That is not what the medical advice is. If you actually read this stuff, it says, just let them do whatever." And be supportive.
They will figure it out.
Like, genuinely, they will figure it out. And a supportive, caring environment is genuinely the best thing for anyone that has gender dysphoria, whether they're trans or not. Like, genuinely, it is so frustrating to hear people who have clearly not read this stuff just say, trans cult, transing children, evil genders, I'm right. Because they're not right. Like,
taken directly from Mumsnet.
That's a real quote.
Lucky for me, I went to the NHS website and looked at all of the advice there, and also read on top of that the Gender Identity Clinic, I read what they sort of their protocols, as in the stuff that was written by the NHS and other places that are the guidelines for what they should do. And also I want to say, don't take this episode as a diagnosis. Speak to a professional. If you're hearing stuff here and you're like, oh, this sounds like me. No, we're not doctors. Neither go to speak to a doctor, please. Please do that instead of...
Go to a doctor.
And just quickly on the comorbidities, so there's substance abuse disorders, and some studies show that being about 28%, with problems with substance abuse, 48.3% in a study of sort of a population had suicidal ideation, 23.8% had attempted suicide at one point in their life, and there's lots of anxiety, depression, personality disorders. Apparently, there's higher rates of gender dysphoria in people with autism, which is also quite interesting. But it's quite clear where a lot of this comes from, right? Like you could see if people are sort of very depressed and have substance abuse issues and all of these sort of things. Maybe it comes from the distress of gender dysphoria, right?
Yeah.
So this is 28% of people who have gender dysphoria.
Yeah.
Will then have substance abuse issues. Yeah.
Yeah.
If they're very unhappy.
Yeah.
Then they might turn
Yeah.
to. Yeah.
Well, yes, these are commonly found coping mechanisms.
Yeah.
And when you are sad,
It's
you
the same-
do the
I think
coping mechanism.
It's similar to the conversation we had with in regards to autism and ADHD, wherein there are a lot of apparent comorbidities there. Wherein if you've got ADHD, you'd be more likely to have some other sort of like depression or anxiety or
Yeah.
something.
Oh god, yeah,
Same
they've
with
got
autism.
like such a high percentage of people with ADHD are addicted to nicotine.
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
so much higher than the general population.
Exactly, and so you could say it would make sense for that to come from a place of it is very difficult living with this. So
Yes.
now I have a substance abuse problem. That sort of
What's
thing.
more remarkable, really, is that 72% of them or whatever don't have a
It's
substance
right,
abuse
like-
problem, and they've got a mismatch or like a confusion between their gender and their sex, which is like quite fundamental to like experiencing the world, and they don't turn to drugs. Wow, well done.
You turn to emo music instead.
I want to
Okay.
point out that another. So this is a quote from Drescher et al. In 2012. Various studies show that transgender young people may present with psychosocial difficulties. Yet it's also true that many young people who present to gender services are not acutely distressed. This may be particularly the case for adolescents who are aware of the possibility of gender transition, who live in an accepting environment, and who can have access to puberty-suppressing treatments until they are able to take a decision to transition physiologically. What that is saying here, this paper from 2012, is that, hey, if you're nice to trans kids and let them know that they can be who they feel they are, they'll probably be less depressed and all of this other stuff.
That's a crazy concept.
It's wild, right? It's almost as though the people who say they're on the side of science aren't on the side of science when what they're saying is to be mean to trans kids until they're not trans kids anymore.
Yeah.
Isn't that? Sorry, isn't that the? That's what the irony here is that's what the Dursleys try to do to Harry Potter. Is they try to be mean to him so that he's not a wizard anymore, and it doesn't work. He becomes the wizardest wizard. He becomes super wizard.
I think it's incredibly clear throughout J.K. Rowling's writing that she did a lot of really good things entirely accidentally and did not understand what was going on in her own work. Because she wrote a TERF in Umbridge, who then cited...
How do you
sort
know
of-
she's a
She's not a
turd?
turf. That's not in. I mean,
No,
she probably may be a turf.
Look, are you
but-
telling me
big
that
TERF
Umbridge is
energy.
not a
No,
TERF?
I'm saying she probably could be a turf,
Well,
but
no,
there
what
are
I'm
no
saying-
trans
Well,
kids
what I'm
in
saying
Harry
is, what I'm
Potter
saying is that
for her
Umbridge is
to be not
Umbridge
nice
is
to.
as an absolute allegory is a perfect allegory for a TERF. Even down to being aligned with the far right. Because it achieves her goals.
I don't
But
mean
what-
that if Umbridge lived in a world in which there were trans people, Umbridge might not be very nice to the trans people. I just mean that she's not. It's not in
not
literature
written
that
as
No,
a
no,
she's.
I'm not
TERF.
saying that she's. I'm not saying that she is literally in text a TERF. What I'm saying is that, like, if you want to, in the same sense that being a werewolf is a metaphor for AIDS. If you really hate gay people, in the same sense, being an Umbridge could be a metaphor for being a TERF. And it works incredibly well.
Umbridge, in fact, is a word that means something. That,
Yeah, to take umbrage. Yeah,
to take umbrage. Yeah. She's super. She tries to enforce conformity.
yeah, and she is in some senses. So she's not. She is not on the far right herself, but she, as we saw in the last book, aligned herself with that government because it was beneficial to her, and she got to hate on the half-breeds that didn't have the right bodies.
Yeah.
Oh dear.
Ding-a-ling-ling, it's the ad bell. What are we advertising today?
We're advertising our spicy merch. I am wearing the tardigrade beanie that we're selling. It's a little tardigrade boy, little water bear going, ooh.
And if you like the tardigrade beanie, you could also get our matching tardigrade t-shirt with a little smiling tardigrade that isn't going ooh, but is going ee.
And if you like the tardigrade t-shirt, you might also like the Sci Guys little pin badges we've made.
Wow.
They don't match, but they do say Sci Guys, and you can show your love for Sci Guys in your pin badge collection, and they're very cute.
Yeah, it's the actual logo.
And there's still a chance to grab our Sci Guys calendar, which will give you a discount on the future calendar if you get it now.
And an extra episode of Sci Guys, all about calendars.
Oh, wow. Yeah, they will get
calendar
that.
episode, yeah.
Well, that's the spawn from ourselves. Back to the episode.
So now let's talk just very briefly about how dysphoria is diagnosed and treated. I say briefly, this is probably going to take longer than I expect. So these are the steps out that are laid out by the NHS. First, you've got to go to your GP, which isn't essential, but it helps because the next step is being referred to a gender dysphoria clinic. You can self-refer, but the GP obviously referring you is much better because essentially they can give them your medical history and all that stuff. If you're up to the ages of 18, you will be referred to the Gender Identity Development Service. If you're 17 or older, you'll be sent to one of the sort of gender dysphoria clinics across the sort of England and elsewhere.
Like an adult one.
An adult one, yeah. So if you're 18 or under, you'll be sent to the kids one. If you're 17 or older, you can be sent to the adults one, which means that you see there's a little bit in there
What if
between
you're
17 and 18. If you're between 17 and 18, you can go to the adults or the kids. You'll probably go to the adults because the waiting lists are incredibly long.
Yeah.
Very true.
You'll be
19 by the time
I was referred. I went to the GP when I was 16, and I knew that the waiting list was so long. So I was like, "Oh, can I go to the adult clinic?" And they're like, "Oh, sorry, no, we can't refer you to the adult clinic." And then I got to the child clinic a month before I turned 18, and I was really excited for my first appointment because I was like, "Oh, finally, let's get things started." First appointment, literally what they said was that we're sorry, you're too old, we can't treat you here. You just got to go to the adult clinic. Also, we didn't fast track you, so you just have to start at the bottom of the wait list.
You had 2 bloody years.
Yeah.
I was 16 when I applied.
Right? Yeah, and then it was so disappointing. But then I had to go private, because if I didn't go private, I would have got top surgery probably last year.
Oh.
And I've had it for 3 years.
3 years in January, yeah. Wow, incredible.
It's very long.
Does anyone know the diagnostic criteria for gender dysphoria?
Oh.
Anyone? No? You should know them.
I hate your titties. I don't know what the
that one on there?
diagnostic. I don't know.
Okay, no,
Discomfort with secondary sex characteristics and primary sex characteristics.
So there's different ones for children and adults. This is from the DSM-5. So for kids, you need to have 6 of these sort of symptoms for at least 6 months. And I'll just quickly go through them. So first off, you need to have a marked incongruence between one's experienced/expressed gender and assigned gender of at least 6 months duration, as manifested by at least of 6 of the following, one of which must be the criterion A1. So you need to have a strong desire to be the other gender, or an insistence that you are the other gender, or some alternative gender different from one's assigned gender, essentially keeping non-binary people in there. So you need to have that, and then 5 of the rest of these, at least 5 of the rest of these. In boys, assigned gender, so if you're assigned male at birth, a strong preference for cross-dressing or simulating female attire, or in girls, assigned gender, so in AFAB people, a strong preference for wearing only typical masculine clothing and a strong resistance to the wearing of typical feminine clothing. A strong preference for, this is the third one.
What if you're a gender non-conforming trans person?
Then you're not trans enough to have gender dysphoria.
Help for you.
Sorry.
It's all about the clothes.
The DSM-5 says you do not have gender dysphoria, I'm afraid. The third one, a strong preference for cross-gender roles in make-believe play or fantasy play. These are for kids, bear in mind. A strong preference for the toys, games, or activities stereotypically used or engaged in by the other gender, or a strong preference for playmates of the other gender. In AMAB people, a strong rejection of typically masculine toys, games, activities, and a strong avoidance of rough and tumble play. Or in AFAB people,
This is so ridiculous.
a strong rejection of typically feminine toys, games, and activities.
And they love rough and tumble.
Yeah, exactly. And the 7th one, a strong dislike of one's sexual anatomy. Number 8, a strong desire for the primary and or secondary sex characteristics that match one's experienced gender. And then category B, that's the condition is associated associated with clinically significant distress or impairment in social, school, or other important areas of functioning. And then you've got to specify if there's a disorder of sex development. So essentially, if this is coming down to being intersex in some way. So sort of androgen insensitivity syndrome.
Right.
Just sort of keeping that in there. So that would be essentially if you're genetically male, but your testosterone receptors essentially, or your androgen, your male sex hormone receptors don't work properly. And so you are physically female in that sense.
Right.
Yeah. So in adults and teenagers, it's kind of similar, but you only need to have 2 of them. And they are, obviously 6 months marked incongruence of your gender, blah, blah, blah. But a marked incongruence between one's experienced or expressed gender and primary and or secondary sex characteristics, or in young adolescents, the anticipated secondary sex characteristics. So essentially, if you've not gone through puberty yet and you're dreading it.
Okay. Right. I get
These
you.
are all very strange because they're all like, they could apply to trans people, but then they also might not apply to trans
They
people.
could very easily not apply.
That's
to
gender
Yeah.
trans
dysphoria.
people.
That's
yeah,
gender dysphoria.
no, I know
you
it's a gender dysphoria thing, but like you go to those clinics usually because you're trans.
The second one, a strong desire to be rid of one's primary and or secondary sex characteristics because of a marked incongruence with one's experienced or expressed gender, or in young adolescents, a desire to prevent the development of anticipated secondary sex characteristics. And then a strong desire for the primary and or secondary sex characteristics of the other gender, a strong desire to be of the other gender, or some alternative gender, essentially. A strong desire to be treated as the other gender. A lot of these sound very similar. And then obviously allowing for non-binary people as well. A strong conviction that one has the typical feelings and reactions of the other gender or non-binary genders. And then obviously it then mentions if the condition is associated with significant sort of stress or impairment in social, occupational, or other important areas of functioning. And then there's a few things you need to specify. For example, if you're intersex and say you've got androgen sensitivity syndrome, so your body doesn't sort of, your testosterone receptors don't quite work as they should, and so despite the fact that you're genetically male, you'd be physically female. Or if you're post-transition and you've transitioned and you no longer have gender dysphoria because you've been living full-time as the desired gender, there's a little caveat for that in there as well.
It's so weird to hear this medicalized because I understand like why it is, but it's also I feel like it's kind of similar in the way that like being trans is like an identity thing in the way that like being gay can also be kind of that.
Mm-hmm.
So like to see it being broken down in these specific roles, where it's just like a desire to play with boys' toys. It's like, okay,
I mean,
okay,
I think
sure.
I think it's interesting though because I mean, obviously, being gay used to be sort of a mental disorder as well.
Yeah.
But in this case, it's not just because they admit it's not just about trans people, right? It's like gender dysphoria isn't just a thing that trans people have. And so I find it really interesting the way that they try and break this down to be like, do you have gender dysphoria? What's going on? Like, how do we figure this out in kids who don't know what they're talking about?
So what's then if you are diagnosed with gender dysphoria, and as you're saying, Corey, sometimes you can be diagnosed with gender dysphoria without being trans. What puts you over that line? Is being trans then socially transitioning, or like what's the difference between having gender dysphoria and being trans?
Don't know.
Okay.
It's really just an identity thing. I think it depends on... Because there are, like, people that... I think it's all about wording and about identity, because there's a lot of people that probably, if you brought them to a gender clinic, they would be diagnosed with gender dysphoria and, like, not diagnosed as trans, but usually the term that you'd use for that is trans. Whereas there are plenty of people that have all of these symptoms, have gender dysphoria, and feel no desire to transition. So I think it's mostly done on like an individual basis, which is why when you go to these clinics, they go through like family history, they go through mental health history, they go like very deeply into your life to assess whether or not transition is a thing that you should do. So I think I think that's why it's so weird reading this, because it's all such an individual thing. Like being trans and having dysphoria is such like a individual, personal thing about somebody's identity that like writing it down in bullet points like this is helpful, I guess, to the people that are diagnosing it. But when it comes to yourself, it's kind of like, okay.
Well, it's often like we have to create systems to
understand
and to teach it to people who don't understand.
Yeah.
And to help like to systematize something.
Yeah.
But in that process, you lose a lot of the definition.
Yeah.
Because you almost make it binary.
Yeah.
I think the key point that we need to understand here is that this isn't a sort of these aren't diagnostic criteria for being trans. this is diagnostic criteria for gender dysphoria.
Yeah.
And those two
Yes.
things are not the same at all. So you know what I mean? So you can have gender dysphoria for any number of reasons, right? That aren't specifically sort of being trans. For
Yeah, there's,
example,
like, people with
if you
big boobs.
if you transition, for example, and then you're like, oh no, I made a mistake, and now I have this body that you would have dysphoria.
Yeah, it's
You'd
also
have dysphoria.
the kind of thing like a lot of like women have boobs that are too big
Mm.
and then get breast reductions because they're like not just physically uncomfortable but like just uncomfortable with the
Yeah.
idea of having like there are plenty of like I mean I'm in a group like a top surgery group on Facebook and it's not just for trans people, it's literally just like top surgery support, and there's like plenty of lesbians that just don't want boobs because they don't feel that it fits them, like they don't feel comfortable with having them
I mean,
because they have dysphoria of some sort. So it's like,
and in looking at this, you could conceivably see how one might then fall under the diagnostic criteria for gender dysphoria, or at least some of the diagnostic criteria for gender dysphoria,
yeah.
without being trans or
Yeah.
wanting to transition.
And without having a desire to transition as well.
I mean,
There
I
are
think,
people that are trans that don't have a desire to transition as well. Like, there's so many different types of people that have like completely different motivations when it comes to like going to a clinic like this. So it's very difficult to like put them in boxes because it's not really something that you can box.
I think the reason that this exists really is because the way that our society is set up for a trans person to get the healthcare that they need, it needs to go through. You can't just be like, okay, like, you know, you can't just be like, okay, trans people, here's hormones and stuff. You know, it needs to go through the sort of normal track that we have for these things, and so you need to have these diagnostic criteria. You need to have it in the DSM. For that healthcare to be given out. Although the issue with this is that because, despite the fact that there are sort of caveats for non-binary people in there, it is quite hard for non-binary people to get hormones and all of these other things because it is very geared towards binary trans people.
Yeah, I mean, like, I don't know what it's like now because I haven't been to a gender clinic. Like, the first appointment I went to a gender clinic was like in 2017, and it's changed a lot since then. But like, I know of plenty of people that are in like trans support groups and we're literally just like, I know that testosterone is the right thing for me. I've wanted it since I was a child, but I'm scared that if I go to the gender clinic and I'm met with somebody that doesn't necessarily believe in non-binary people, that I'll have to lie and be like, yeah, I only played with boys' toys because they just need access to that medication.
Yeah.
Like, there are plenty of people that are like, have been turned away from top surgery because they're non-binary. Like, it's a very difficult...
But it's a difficult line to walk as well because you don't want people just being able to, you don't want someone walking into a doctor's office and being like, I am definitely trans, and then getting all of the healthcare that trans people get, and then being like, I was wrong. There needs to be like, and
Well,
this is the difficult. I know that that detransitioners are like, I mean, the highest estimates are like maybe 10%, but the more realistic ones are around about 1%, right?
It's like less than 1%.
But that number would be higher if people were able to just go and get testosterone over the counter. Like, it would.
You say this.
Well, I don't know.
No. But you say
Right.
this, and I mean, you would think that would be the case.
Yeah.
However, there are a lot of trans people that are on waiting lists that have not yet
Right, so
transitioned.
those numbers
and
would
so
inflate.
those numbers would inflate with the detransition. Do you know what I mean? And I like what I'm saying is that I understand having some sort of barriers in place to make sure that people that are vulnerable don't make sort of permanent changes that they can't sort of reverse. But also doing so at the explicit detriment of all of the trans people who definitely do exist and definitely do need that healthcare is just bad maths.
Yeah, it's a difficult thing to work out because in America there's like informed consent clinics where you can, as an adult, just go in and be like, yeah, I will sign this
Really?
consent
Wow.
form that says
Wow.
I know of all the side effects and what could happen, and I'm making this decision myself. And you can go in and get those things. But then there's also the argument that like there are people that like there are so many different numbers of reasons why people could have gender dysphoria, I'm sure, which like Corey's going to go into. But like there's like obviously a very difficult relationship with like people that are like sexual abuse survivors. Like, they have a completely different relationship with their body, and like being sexually abused could make you feel some kind of gender dysphoric way towards your genitals. So there's like, it's a really difficult. I don't know if there is an answer because like for some people just need to go to an informed consent clinic, and that is the best way. It like gets rid of years worth of being on a wait list, and some people will need that extra thinking time. So it's like, it's a very difficult thing to say what is right and what is wrong.
I think that, to be honest, if having looked at the protocol that the UK has, it's it seems to me generally fairly solid. I think the waiting times are. I mean, some of the waiting times are a bit long. No,
All of the waiting times are long.
But that's across the entirety of the NHS.
No.
Oh,
you're
no, but there are
misunderstanding me.
people
You're-
waiting like
you're-
4
you're not
years for one
understanding me.
appointment.
You're misunderstanding me entirely. So that's not the protocol. That is just that is how it's happening now. The protocol doesn't say make trans people wait 4 years. The protocol says
Oh no, I know that.
you need to wait. You need to be. What is it? I think 2 years between. You need to be living like fully as your gender 2 years before you can have bottom surgery or something like that, right? And I'm saying that like some of the things they've got in there make sense. It makes some semblance of sense. But it could be. It's a really difficult topic, and I think it needs to be a lot better.
Yeah.
But it's just like
I think it depends on what you mean by make sense as well. Because like for some people, they've gone their whole lives being like, yeah, I don't want a dick. And
Okay.
for them to have to wait 2
It
more
should be
years.
able to be fast tracked.
Well, that's what I mean. Like I
You
don't.
can have some other criteria for fast tracking people.
Yeah.
what I'm saying is it makes sense if you don't look at it just as okay, the only people that are going to be accessing this are the people that need it. If you're looking at it as though okay, there are some people here who are not necessarily like this is what's difficult. This is what's difficult about medicalizing being trans, right? Is that gender dysphoria could have a number of different causes, right? Or a number of different reasons that one might feel gender dysphoria. And the most common reason is, being trans and like, needing to transition. There are some people that, and like this is something that I find that our side of the aisle sometimes find difficult to talk about, is that there are some people that genuinely just need therapy, and that will help them, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's for pretty much when you go to one of the appointments, you'll be asked about like family history, about mental health history, and like specifically if you've ever had like sexual abuse when you were younger. That's something that they like to talk about, obviously for what I said earlier. But like, yeah,
I suppose if you're convinced you're trans,
yeah,
and they're going to ask that question,
yeah,
you might just say no.
Yeah.
Because you
Exactly,
want,
well,
you want
yeah.
the medication, you want the treatment.
yeah.
But that might actually be relevant. I don't know. I don't know anything about this.
The way that the protocol seems to go, it kind of in that like the surgeries that you get, by the time you're getting bottom surgery, you'll have already been. You should basically be immediately eligible once you've been on hormones for a while,
Right.
and then have recovered from say say top surgery or something, right? To an extent, I'm not saying that it is the best that it could be. It's not the worst that it could be. It's almost fine. Like in a perfect world, it's almost fine. Although one thing I will say, that like almost to go back on everything I said, is that from some views, okay, you could understand. Let's maybe put some sort of buffer to stop people that might be making the wrong decision here, right? Mm-hmm. Then also there are people that can just get horns implanted in their heads.
Yeah, it's like about bodily autonomy.
This is what's really difficult here is that we let people do whatever they want to their bodies in a lot of ways, and then when it comes to trans people, there are massive barriers.
Yeah,
and you could make an argument either way that okay, we should let anyone do whatever they want with their body, or maybe we should be a little bit more hesitant with like other body modifications, right? But it's
like if you're a cis woman and you want to get a boob job, you can go to a clinic, just get a boob job. If you're a trans person and you want bigger boobs, you have to go through so many assessments. It's not just like one assessment that you have to go to.
Yeah, why
they have
can't
to go
you
through
just...
your family history, your mental health history, what went wrong in your life to make you think that you need boobs. Like,
because why can't you just like?
Yeah, well, this
if
is why
if I want a trained medical professional to just place some physical matter underneath my chest, why can't I do that?
That's why it's like such a difficult conversation to have, because like on the one hand, yes, it makes sense that there are barriers in place for some people that maybe would rush into a medical transition if maybe in the future it's not right for them, but it's also the case of like, why are we putting these rules up for trans people when cis people don't have these rules for the exact same treatment?
Do you want my most nuclear take?
What?
My absolute most nuclear take on this stuff.
Oh God!
Whenever people talk about transition or protecting people that might be making the wrong decision, I have a very hard number on like what level of detransitioners is like acceptable, right? That number is 49%. You can go up to 49%, and if you go past 49%, okay, then start putting the limitations. Because what you were right. This is what happens, right? If let's say you've got anything less than 49%, then you actually have got a very high success rate with helping trans people, right? With helping people. if you had like, so if you were to basically stop treatment at anything less than 49%, what you're doing is saying, these trans people, their experience is worth less than these non-trans people.
It's 51%.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's also with like if you have like cancer and you've got like a really risky treatment where there's a 20% chance that you'll live, you'll still take that because there's a chance that you will live. But when it comes to like trans stuff, like there's like a less than 1% rate of detransitioners, and because of those detransitioners, so many people are hesitant.
Well, it clearly comes down to the fact that ultimately people don't want trans people to exist, right? And they're coming up with any reason that, well, actually, there's detransitioners. What if people are making a mistake? Okay, right, but you can see that most people aren't making mistakes. So if
objectively,
if you have an issue with people being depressed and all of that stuff from having dysphoria, wouldn't it be better to have like as few people as possible have dysphoria? And if essentially what detransitioners experience is dysphoria, would it not be better to let more people transition, and then if you've got detransitioners, as long as they're below the level of trans people at the beginning, then you're good.
It's also super interesting how this is like, it almost breaks the traditional political lines, because I think you could probably make a fairly safe bet that at least a sizable majority of the people who are sort of pro-trans will probably be on the left side of the political spectrum.
Yeah.
And I think you can probably make a fairly safe bet that a decent chunk of the people who are anti-trans are on the right side of the spectrum.
Yeah, of course.
And what's super interesting about that is that we're talking about, having access to like taking testosterone if you're born female, for example.
Yeah.
And in the traditional political lines, the right would want to like reduce the amount of red tape in place to individuals making free choices in a free market economy, right? And so the traditional line would be, if you want to purchase testosterone, which is not a class A, B, or C substance, why, if there isn't a good reason to have it regulated, then we shouldn't regulate it.
Yeah.
But then in this case, it's sort of the left or members on the left arguing for the liberalization of access to or the decrease in the amount of regulation.
Yeah.
It's super interesting.
I think a lot of it is just like fear mongering. Like it's like it's pretty simple that like read any of the studies, they all suggest that like if a trans person has the accessibility to has access to medical transition, after medical transition, they will be happier. Yeah. And it's so strange to me that there's like this massive debate about like, what should we do with trans people? How many barriers should we put in place to stop them doing those things that may make them happier? It's so strange because it's just like, you give somebody who is sad that they don't have tits, they'll probably be a bit happier about that.
I think it's because it makes them question the entire basis of their worldview.
Yeah, true. Yes. Yeah.
But this is what's frustrating to me, is that it's so clear. Like the evidence that we have makes it very obvious that just letting people get on with themselves is fine. And these the protocols for you need to be living in your assigned gender role for a year and a half before getting bottom surgery. That would probably not be an issue if people were just able to live as whatever gender they wanted. Yeah. For and leading up to that, right? Do you know what I mean? Like if you realize you're trans when you're say 12, and your parents are like, okay, cool, be trans. Then by the time you're 18, you're not gonna have to wait for bottom surgery because you'll have. Do you know what I mean? You'll have been living in it for that long. So this is what's frustrating is that there are issues with the protocol that we've got. Definitely, it's not perfect, but it would definitely be made better if people just bloody accepted. Obviously, more resources in general, but if people just the bare minimum you could do is just accept and support the trans people in your life. And if a kid is saying. If a kid is sort of being non-normative in their gender expression, you don't need to force them to be trans. Not that anyone is doing that. People genuinely say people are doing that. That's not what it is. You just need to be you can do what you want. Yeah. And that is genuinely taken to be into being people are transing kids. But ultimately, who is really transing kids? Who is really imposing their ideology on children here?
Trans YouTubers.
The people that are saying, "Hey kid, you can kind of do what you want," or the people that are saying, "Hey, you look like a boy, so you have to be a boy, and if you're not, then I'm going to send you to conversion therapy." I feel like you're the bad ones here, Yeah.
Feels quite a lot like that old thing that you get from some of the older generations of my parents did this to me and I
And I
turned
was
out
fine.
fine. Maybe ignoring the fact that
They're not.
they're not necessarily fine.
I smacked my kid, and my parents smacked me, and I turned out fine. You're smacking your kid. I don't think you turned out
You're
fine.
okay with violence. I don't
Yeah.
think you're
I use corporal punishment on my child, just like my dad did to me. There's nothing wrong with that. So like, sort of moving on. So we've kind of gone through the diagnostic criteria of gender dysphoria, and we've covered that not all people that have gender dysphoria are trans. Not all trans people have gender dysphoria. If you have an issue with that, you've got an issue with that? I looked it up, and no, they literally say in the diagnostic criteria, they literally say in a number of places that trans people don't need to have dysphoria. I was
Sounds like
genuinely
your
shocked by
problem.
this.
Yeah.
I mentioned this to you when I read it the other day. That I can't remember where I read it exactly. It'll be in the show notes. That it said from like maybe about 8-9 years ago, it pretty much explicitly, you don't need to have dysphoria to be trans, and that's been a debate in the trans community over the past few years.
They're constantly updating all of these things. Like the names of things have completely changed. Like the inclusion of non-binary people has changed. Like they're always updating this stuff.
So coming from the Gender Identity Clinic, the oldest gender clinic in the UK, they said, and I quote, they refer to the interim gender dysphoria protocol and service guideline from 2013 to 2014 and the Royal College of Psychiatry good practice guidelines for the assessment and treatment of adults with gender dysphoria 2013, adapted as necessary for use within the UK's National Health Service and tailored with clinical judgment to the individual situation. What that's saying is that there are these two big documents that are about 29 and 61 pages respectively, and they use those to form the basis of their treatment and care for trans people. Now, they don't use them basically verbatim. They will tailor it to the individual and also update it based on sort of what smart doctors think, essentially,
Yes.
right? And I would genuinely recommend going through these because they are very, very interesting, and they're a lot more modern and progressive than you'd expect of a document from 2013 in regards to trans people. But they've got a flowchart here that we can quickly go through. So first off, the patient goes to the GP or another specialist service, and then they get referred to the Gender Identity Clinic. You went to the GSC, right?
Yes, I have been to the Child's Gender Clinic, I've been to the NHS GIC, and I've been to a private gender clinic.
Wow.
So I've been
all of them.
I've been to all of them.
You've been getting around,
Yeah,
haven't
I'm
you?
getting around,
block.
yeah,
You little gender slut,
Right,
aren't you?
experience gender That's funny.
So then you go to so then a bunch of stuff happens at the GSE. Then you're assessed by two GIC team members. One of them has got to be medically qualified at least. And then you get a provisional diagnosis of gender dysphoria. If you're not diagnosed with gender dysphoria, then you're discharged and referred to somewhere else for further support. If it's uncertain, then you get ongoing support and assessment from the Gender Identity Clinic for dysphoria. And then you could be discharged for referral or further support if they decide that you don't have gender dysphoria. And then you get, after the sort of ongoing support, you can then get a provisional diagnosis of gender dysphoria. And if you do have that sort of provisional diagnosis, then you discuss life options and treatment possibilities, including living in gender role congruent with your gender identity, and then discussing the sort of start dates and whatnot. And then you agree on an individual care plan, and that's agreed between the Gender Identity Clinic and the patient. And then you have sort of regular follow-up appointments, and they sort of let you know what's going on in regards to like the sort of timelines. And I think you have sessions for family members, partners, and carers. And then there's a continuing review of the individual care plan. You know, as all of this is going on,
It's a lot.
it's a lot.
They do a lot. You go to a gender clinic and they don't just give you hormones. They have like very vigorous assessments, which are sometimes very uncomfortable to experience.
Oh.
And it says here, if progressing towards genital surgery, should complete agreed period living in gender role congruent with gender identity. So you need to live in your gender identity. I can't remember the exact time. It's somewhere between I think 1 and 2 years, I think, or maybe 18 months or so. You need to be living in your gender identity day to day, every day.
No
Before
breaks
you can
from your gender.
No, genuinely. And this is I got this written somewhere in my notes that this is a serious issue because let's say you're not in an environment where you can do that.
Yeah.
What they're gonna if they find you out, they're gonna be like, oh, you didn't do that. And
Not
it's like,
trans.
well, I'm
Yeah.
not safe.
Yeah.
Like,
It's also the
trans.
kind of thing that like when I came out to my parents and I was like, don't call me Noah or he, him before I come out to everybody because it'll just be confusing. And then when I did come out, it still felt weird, people calling me he, him, because I'm just like, people are going to think I'm a girl because my voice is so high.
So there's two different options here generally, female to male and male to female. Which one do you want to do first?
Oh,
Are
personal.
we going both ways?
We'll go both ways.
Okay.
There and back.
Okay. We'll do. Okay. So I'm a male. I'd like to go male to female
Okay,
first.
let's
and then I'll detransition and I'll become
Go
Luke again.
female to male, FTM.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
MTFTM.
Yeah.
so let's go through the male to female track.
Please.
So, treatments can be provided in an order appropriate for individual need in accordance with more detailed guidance provided in this document. So, in order to do this sort of stuff, you need documented support of 2 clinicians who are directly involved in the patient's care. At least one must be medically qualified, who must then make their recommendation or referral, and that's for hormone therapy. You only need 1 clinical opinion if you want to get psychotherapy or speech therapy.
Do you know what those are?
Speech therapy.
Yes. So, obviously, they won't give you estrogen if you've only had 1 clinical opinion, obviously, but they'll give you psychotherapy and speech therapy. Speech therapy is pretty much like, it's kind of just, I'm not sure the details of the exact appointments, but I'm pretty sure it's available for trans guys as well. But pretty much you just go to a place and they show you how to mess around with your voice, because usually the way they speak about it is that like men will speak from their chest more than from their throat. Yeah. So like if you're female to male, they'll teach you about that, but I assume it's a different way for like trans women. There's also like at the private clinic I went to, they have what's it called, like appointments for like, they have workshops where they like show you how to do your makeup and like show you how to do like your hair and that. So like yeah, there's things
So
that are
sweet.
available
Lady
that,
school.
yeah, so like obviously there are, it's strange because people think that you can just go and get hormones, but there's clearly before hormones you even have the option to go to speech therapy.
Did you have speech
cool.
therapy?
No.
Oh, okay.
No.
I think what
It's
you're
an
saying about
option.
where men talk, I think it's very interesting because do you guys speak differently around different people?
Oh, yes.
Because my
Yeah,
voice,
yeah,
when I was
yeah.
in work, and this is or around certain people, and it's not entirely on purpose, my voice has a number of different, just like sort of pitches that I
Yes.
naturally talk in.
Yes.
So when I'm doing videos or on the podcast, I generally speak in this sort of higher pitch here.
Yeah.
I'm not sure quite why. This is where my voice usually sits.
More engaging.
And then it is. It
Yeah.
sounds and it's a bit freer, whatever. And I need to be clear. I naturally slip into both of these voices. I never think about them.
Yeah.
And then when I used to work in an office, every single day I'd go in a bit. All right, man, how you doing? Yeah, you all right?
It's
He did-
really
Yes,
strange when you do
yes.
that.
Really?
Yes.
This is,
It's really freaky when you
I'm
suddenly
not on purpose.
You do it in shops quite a lot.
I was about to say
Oh,
we
yeah.
went to Wagamama's and you asked for a table.
Oh, can I get a table,
could I get a
please?
table, please?
It's so
I was like,
weird.
All right, mate. You all right? How you doing?
Yeah, it's just like, what?
I always find it really strange.
I honestly didn't notice it for a long time.
Until someone pointed out.
Until
to
someone pointed out
Yeah.
that I because Noah would make fun of me. He was like, "Oh, you're making your voice deeper." And I'm like, "No, I'm not.
No,
what you talking about? This is just how I talk." It's like that's not how you talk.
No,
I'm like,
it's very different.
But both of them are exactly how I talk. I just talk differently around different people. And this is something I think I noticed with have you noticed that a lot of this is way off topic, but apparently a lot of gay men speak like higher, have a higher voice than straight men. We did this we did a kind of I think a bonus episode on this.
Yep.
Apparently that's not necessarily the case, but the reason there's sort of maybe gay accent, let's say, right? How gay people speak stereotypically in a
Yes.
particular way. At least part of that could be down to the fact that a lot of straight men like actually make their voices deeper when they talk, like I'm doing right now.
That's so funny.
But not necessarily, and like not on purpose or whatever.
Yeah.
It's just the way that you talk around certain people.
Yeah.
But when you're around more
Around the
queer
lights.
people,
Yeah.
you don't need to like have your voice be that sort of monotonous. Like
Yeah.
you can be more feminine in the way that you let your voice go up and
Playful.
down, and you use your you know what I mean. There is something to be
The way
said. in the
that
sort
you
of-
use your words and your expressions.
yeah, it's
Don't talk like you're about to beat someone up.
But I think it's really interesting because you don't think about how you sort of almost code switch your voice in the different ways that you talk to different people. But amongst guys, like straight guys and stuff, I generally do just like speak differently.
I used to
don't
do it
know-
for
I don't mean to.
videos.
Yeah, me
Before-
too.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, wait, no.
You did
So-
the opposite for videos. You went like,
Yeah, really high.
Oh,
Yeah.
no, but I'm talking about like before I started testosterone, I would film the entire video, listen back and be like, oh, my voice sounds really high. So then I'd film the entire video again, speaking lower, and then
dumped it.
I know. But then when I started testosterone and I was doing testosterone updates, I couldn't figure out what was the right
I think it was
way to
month
speak.
5.
Because it was just like I didn't because my voice was dropping. I was like, I wanted to sound deeper, but is this inaccurate? And I'm making it deeper, and it was.
I think if you go back and listen through, I think month 5 there might be a slight switch where it suddenly goes from being a little bit deeper to being a little bit higher, because that was the point where I noticed and made fun of you, and you stopped doing it.
Oh,
This is my voice 1 week on tea.
Well, no, if I go back, I don't have any of like the videos yet, but like if I go back, I'll have like 20 takes of me saying the same thing, trying to get like the right
It's like,
depth.
this is my voice 5 months on T.
This is my voice.
This is my voice 6 months on T.
Suddenly
Yeah.
he becomes the movie announcer.
hello.
But yeah, you can get speech therapy.
That was male to female, MTF. This is FTM, female to male. It's basically the same for the speech therapy and the psychotherapy. You just need one clinical opinion, but you need documented support of 2 clinicians who are both involved with your care directly, one of whom needs to be medically sort of qualified. And that's to refer you for hormone therapy, mastectomy, and chest reconstruction, top surgery, and hysterectomy and BSO, which is essentially, I'm pretty sure it's removing the ovaries.
You can get so many different types of hysterectomies. Some people get like everything taken out. Some people keep one ovary. Like there are so
Why?
many
Is
different.
that to stop
So-
hormone production?
Yeah,
Well,
so
so
in-
you need a bit of estrogen, don't you? In like for everyday things. And
No, I mean, why? So you're doing the hysterectomy in order to reduce the amount of estrogen in your
No,
naturally
well,
released
so
estrogen.
there are so many reasons why trans men on testosterone will get a hysterectomy. Some people get it just because of dysphoria. Some people will get it because sometimes when people go on testosterone, they can have issues with like their reproductive system. There's sometimes like atrophy happens. You used to be told that like if you started testosterone 5 years later, you'd have to get a hysterectomy. But that was based on studies that weren't really reflective of like
Oh.
the general population. So some people were still told they need to get one, but like some people just don't get one. Like I haven't got one.
An oophorectomy.
I wouldn't get one unless I needed one. That's removal of balls, isn't it?
No, an oophorectomy, that's an orchidectomy.
Ah, yeah.
An oophorectomy is removal of the
boobs.
ovaries. Yeah. So yeah, essentially, hysterectomy. Removing the uterus and the ovaries, you would need the sort of 2 people to sort of refer you, one of whom needs to be medically qualified.
But this is something that's also interesting to me because it's so hard for trans people to access medical help that cis people can get. But if you want to get a hysterectomy and you're just like a cis woman, it is very difficult to get a hysterectomy under the age of 40. Like a lot.
Yeah, they really don't want
some
to.
people are just
Yeah.
like, have you got permission from your husband? Like,
Oh,
some
what?
people- yeah.
That's
It's really
'cause I saw a
dodgy.
tweet about this the other day.
Yeah.
And it said that a lot of the time, and the exact wording of the tweet was like, they will refuse to remove your womb in case a man wants to use it.
Yeah.
And I
yeah,
didn't
yeah, yeah.
understand what that.
Oh yeah,
what that
it's
was.
dreadful. There's also like a lot of people with endometriosis. They have a
Oh,
difficult
gosh.
time getting hysterectomy. There's like, because it's very difficult because you have to like have surgery to get diagnosed with like endometriosis. But yeah, it's just a terrible thing where like you can't just go in and get a hysterectomy. It's just a bodily autonomy thing. If you want to get a hysterectomy, you should be able to get one.
I was about to say, I think what we're hitting on here is that we tend to remove people's bodily autonomy if they are members of certain marginalized groups.
Yeah,
And
which is
so-
the issue with the
I
whole
could just
system.
get my testicles removed, couldn't I?
You can get your tubes. I don't know
No.
about that.
Oh, really? Okay.
No. Surgeons, so this is the issue. I think there's a problem with removing healthy tissue for really no reason, if that makes sense.
That feels like an all
So-
right general rule.
So yeah.
But then, especially
Fine.
when it comes to hysterectomies, like you have periods every month, and they're horrible.
But
Like, some
that's-
people have terrible
that's
periods.
not for no reason then. That's for a reason.
Oh
Yeah.
no! But even
Yeah,
then, some people will cite that as a reason and not be.
Oh, I
Right.
understand
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
I just
yeah.
mean, if I want to have part of
for
my
no
arm
reason.
removed
Yeah.
for fun, someone should probably say
Oh,
no.
I've seen somebody do that. You have to go to like a different.
Yeah,
country.
but if there's a
Yeah.
reason why I want to have something, and
Yeah.
I say there's a reason, and they agree with me that having that procedure would fix the problem I have,
yeah,
and I said I understand the knock-on effects of that,
Yeah.
and I'm also willing to pay for it.
yeah,
That feels like a thing that I should probably be allowed to
Yeah.
do.
So once you've done all of that, you've got to then complete your period of living in a gender role congruent with the gender identity agreed. So you agree with your doctor what gender identity you want to live in,
Oh,
and then you live in it for, it's like a video game,
And
right?
the
You gotta
doctor
live
gives
in it
you
for-
choose your permission.
fighter. Yeah. And then
Character do you
so
want to be?
ridiculous.
And
You
then
haven't
either-
unlocked this gender.
And then either there's no further treatment needed, and at which point you're discharged to your doctor for ongoing hormone treatment, or if you do need further treatment, for example, sort of genital reassignment surgery, you then need referral from another independent sort of clinician that isn't directly involved in your care.
So you need 3 people involved.
Yeah,
to
and
tell
one
you.
at least one opinion has got to be medical.
Yes, us 3 people agree that you do not want a dick.
Medical
Go
being
forth.
obviously like being a doctor, as in like having a medical, like
Yeah.
and then you get referred for genital reassignment surgery, or another surgery is accessed via NHS England.
Such as facial feminization surgery. Is facial feminization
that's,
surgery on this?
Surely
Yeah,
that's
so
just
that's for
cosmetic surgery.
No,
Oh,
so
wait.
What?
No, so FFS is it's okay. So there are a number that aren't included on the NHS, and there are others that I think that can be, but FFS isn't just like cosmetic surgery. It does actually show up in the protocols. I mean, like,
But if I wanted to go to a plastic surgeon and have them make my face feminine,
but you're not a trans woman.
no, I understand that. But if I understand to a certain extent, if the NHS are paying for the entire procedure, they're going to want to check that the money is being spent well.
Yeah.
Like that's a fairly acceptable bar. But if I as a man who just fancies
look
having a more feminine face, for just because I might want to,
Yeah. You would be able to do
We'll be
that.
able to do that.
No,
Okay.
you can. So
Yeah.
this is so sorry to be clear. How this kind of works is that the other surgeries that aren't core surgeries, they're accessed through CCG, which is the clinical commissioning group. Essentially, these are not seen as like gender reassignment, but there
Yes.
is a track to once you've got like your basically hormones and stuff.
Yeah.
You've then got a track to be shoved onto this to get FFS or breast augmentation or lipoplasty, which is like contouring your the fat in your body, or gamete storage, which I was going to say you must have gone through.
So pretty much when I went to the child gender clinic, they told me that I couldn't go to the clinic there. I had to go into another clinic, and then they said, "Do you want gamete storage?" And I was like, "Yeah, I want to get my eggs frozen." And pretty much the CCG, they don't cover every area. So if I lived in a different part of the country, I may have been able to get my eggs frozen for free, but I had to pay $5,000 to get my eggs
What?
frozen when I was 18.
What? Where did you get that money from?
YouTube.
Really?
Yeah, and
Wow.
like my dad put money in it as well.
Wow.
But like, yeah, so there's like there are certain things that have to do with transition that they don't necessarily deem necessary, but like I don't know.
And again, if
I
all of
feel
these
like
things were
facial feminization surgery should be probably quite
Yeah.
closer to necessary. 'Cause it's
there are a couple
so
of these.
difficult.
There are a couple of these that are non-core ones that I'm like, yeah, but they should be. Like you say, FFS, but also the sort of breast augmentation and stuff. Like this is
Yeah, that feels like it should
Yeah.
be
That
like
feel- exactly.
optional. Like optional, of course, but
because technically you
easy
can
to
grow breast
access.
tissue on when you're on estrogen. So that's I think probably is the sort of idea behind that,
Right.
because you can grow because you grow some breast tissue when you're on estrogen.
well, I'm sorry. So I meant I actually don't know the terms. I meant like having top surgery. Is top surgery on the?
Oh
Yeah.
yeah,
That's
top
on the-
surgery.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then if top surgery is, then I feel like facial feminization surgery. That's kind of the equivalent. No.
But your breasts
No,
won't
the
go
equivalent
away.
of top surgery is top surgery.
Do you
like
mean
a
in
breast
terms of
enlargement.
like passing?
Sorry, I mean in terms of passing. Yeah, because you can stuff your t-shirt
Yeah.
and you can pass in public. Whereas if your goal is to pass as a trans woman and you have a traditionally masculine face,
Yeah.
that's going to be tough.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
also
no,
weird because
I-
these are all things that are provided to trans people usually to lessen their dysphoria. Whereas like just in terms of like obviously like trans women and trans men have like different levels of dysphoria and like they have dysphoria about different parts of their body. But like just in terms of like the trans women that I know, like the majority of their dysphoria comes from like their masculine facial features.
Yeah.
Because they're not things that I mean when you start estrogen, like obviously your body fat redistributes and your face will feminize. But
Right,
like there are
okay.
some things that are just like seen as very masculine, like having an Adam's apple, like having a wide jaw, like having
nose, yeah.
having like a
Brow.
But
a
this-
brow bone,
yeah.
and like, but that's what they do with facial feminization surgery. Like they'll like grind down your brow bone, they'll like grind down your jaw, they'll lower your hairline.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they'll go like full out, but like those are all things that cause like a lot of dysphoria and probably like
Yeah.
I'm sure there are some trans women out there that like the majority of their dysphoria is from like their facial features.
I mean, it's what you see every day as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like, you see your face all the time.
And it's the first thing that people
my-
judge you on.
This is one thing though that bugs me, right? And I'm not saying that FFS shouldn't be covered. Like I've said already, I think it should be. Is that a lot of cis women have masculine faces?
Yeah.
Oh my god,
Yeah.
my mum literally was telling me the other day, she was in a bathroom and there was a woman who had a slightly masculine face and this flipping other woman started going, "You shouldn't be in here. You shouldn't be here. This is a women's bathroom." And the woman was like, "I'm literally a female
I'm a
woman.
woman.
What's going on?"
Oh my god.
It's also interesting because
They
it's
can
like,
always tell.
a lot of like older women, like they go through menopause and like they will become masculinized because of the amount of hormones in their body. Like
Yeah.
it's so weird how like we have this assumption that like every woman is like it's like slim face, like large cheeks, like pretty little nose when that's just like not real.
Every single woman.
But seriously, like you're saying TERFs say they could always tell, and we were in a group with TERFs versus TRAs, which was really just a TERF group on Facebook where they could make themselves feel as though they were actually engaging with the other side. They weren't. But they would do this thing where they would post pictures of women. And they'd be like, oh, yeah, look at her big chin.
Big hands.
Oh, my God, look at her massive shoulders. And then someone would be like, oh, no, hold on, guys, we got this wrong. That woman's a cis woman. And they're like, whatever. She's every single time. You could show them any woman ever, and they will find something wrong with her. And then you tell them that she's not a trans woman, and they're like, it doesn't affect their worldview whatsoever.
They think they can clock a trans person literally anytime, all the time. But it's also like, I have so many comments that are just like, you'll never be a woman. Like, they think I'm trying to be a trans woman. Like, they don't, there's no actual, there's nothing behind it.
I watched this really interesting thing the other day where the video is called Two Biologists, or a Biologist defines what a woman is. And I, being an idiot, I thought, I was like really excited. I clicked this video thinking, I was like, oh, is this biologist going to give a good description of a woman that incorporates trans people? This is interesting to me. And then it was two biologists basically saying a woman is a human female.
That's so interesting, because I always thought that a woman was someone that, generally identified as a woman. But now that I've figured out that all of the intersex women I've met in my life are no longer women, I'd better update. I'd got to update my worldview. Clearly,
but on that specific thing, they were sort of explaining away that by going the traditional thing of like, oh, these people just don't fit into the category, but that doesn't mean the category doesn't exist. And as an example of that, what I found really interesting, as an example of that, they said, for example, you have mountains and you have the floor. Does that mean just because you can't tell where the mountain begins and where the floor begins doesn't mean there isn't really a mountain and a floor, and that mountains and floors are a construct in the mind? But they are.
No.
A mountain is a load of rock in a certain shape, and we call it mountain because it's relevant to our experience. Doesn't mean that there literally isn't.
Words have
But also
definitions
they're
because we give them
essentializing-
definitions.
Yeah.
It's weird. Like, some people will be. I don't remember. There was a video recently where someone was just like, pronouns come from sex. Like, your sex. Pronouns are sex-based. Sex-based pronouns.
Under a
I
microscope, you
That's
can
not
just
what
see them
pronouns
written
are.
in.
Pronouns are words. It's a language that we've made up.
Yeah.
And you're trying to...
Hang on, does it not say
It's all
Mr.
magnet.
tattooed across your penis from birth?
No, that's just you.
When did I get that tattoo?
So titles are sex-based as well.
Yeah, it's in your
Doctor?
DNA. It's in your
A
DNA.
doctor's non-binary.
Oh, you're born with doctor on your penis or on your vagina.
Oh,
that's when they let
Oh.
women start being doctors. Is when they start being babies,
When the first one came
baby
out.
girls
Yeah.
born with doctor
They're like, oh,
tattooed on them.
Time to
Oh,
update,
okay.
I guess. Yeah.
We'll let them work
them
as
work, yeah.
doctors now. They don't have to
But
just be
at the same
nurses.
time, they'd cut the umbilical cord. It's the same time.
That's when they check. Yeah, they
Yeah,
check what
yeah.
the tattoo says.
This has really gotten out of hand, hasn't
Doesn't
it?
it?
But anyway, the point is that these biologists were sort of saying, the example they gave, what was really funny was there was two biologists and they kept arguing with each other about the examples they used, which was especially entertaining. But they used this example of when does the floor become a mountain? And that specifically is a bad example.
Awful
Yeah.
example.
Because mountain is just a description of a load of floor that gets pointy.
And also,
Yeah.
we don't categorize the world into mountain and floor and act as though anything anything that exists
Nothing else
outside of those two
Hill.
doesn't exist.
Hill
No. Hill is
an outlier.
Hole.
No. Yeah. Come on, look. There's like 1% of all of the ground in the world is hills. So why are you bringing up hills just to win your argument, huh?
What about a
really,
ditch?
you don't really care about hills or their issues. Neither do I. But you don't really care. Like, honestly, TERFs are just like, and transphobes are just.
I just found it super interesting. They kept on like shooting themselves in the foot in their description of things.
I think the issue, first off, like right off the bat, with the video title of two biologists define what a woman is. So why are these biologists talking about sociology? Huh? Like what's their deal, right? Because a woman isn't a biological concept.
That's a female, right?
Yeah. If you want to define
true.
what female is, that's fine. But if you're going to do that,
Chemist describes what a quark is. What?
Like, I mean, I'm sure you probably have some idea, but like, I'd rather go to the guy that actually knows. You know?
Physicist.
But seriously, when we talk, let's just briefly talk about this, right? Because there'll be people sitting frothing at the mouth, absolutely fuming, that we've said all of this and that we've got a trans person on the podcast as well. I'm sorry for using it like that, but
They will be fuming.
There'll be people that are
Well,
foaming
hang
at
on,
the
we
mouth.
haven't got it. There's only 3 of us here.
Okay. So there'll be people that are absolutely fuming, right? Raging. And I just want to say to them, okay, let's talk about what sex actually is very briefly, right? So you could say sex is your chromosomes. Okay, cool, sex is your chromosomes. So then what sex are people that have androgen insensitivity syndrome, who are chromosomally male, but are physically appear female because of the lack of androgen sensitivity in the body, the lack of their body's ability to, basically respond to testosterone. Huh? What are they? What are they?
Weirdos!
Exactly.
They're an anomaly.
But then also, so if sex is just your chromosomes, then you can never ever tell me that you care about anyone's sex at all, or that sex-based discrimination exists, or any of this stuff exists, because ultimately you do not know anyone's chromosomes. I know that you don't, because you don't have the mental capacity to check someone's chromosomes, because you can't understand that trans people exist. Anyway,
The example they gave as biologists was the one we've talked about before, which is about which gametes your body produces.
Sure.
Which seems like a weird...
But if your body doesn't produce any gametes, or if your body is capable, if your body potentially has the capability of producing
gametes, yeah.
My point is that, ultimately...
But is it really relevant?
It's not
to
relevant.
being
so when
people in the world,
my point
what
is that there
gametes
are
everyone's
multiple,
making?
My point is that there are multiple different ways that we sort of measure sex, right? Or ways that we sort of assign sex to someone.
Yeah.
And I saw someone the other day getting really wound up that someone said a doctor assigns your sex, and that tells me that they literally do not know
What does assign
anything
mean?
because doctors genuinely do assign sex, and it says so in this protocol that I read as well, because they look at the genitals and they're like, which one is this?
And if they can't decide, they just do surgery on intersex people.
And genitals can be ambiguous, and they can get it wrong. Doctors assign you your sex. There are different things that we do to look for sex. There are the primary and secondary sexual characteristics that we spoke about. There's chromosomes and there's hormones. Trans people can change most of those except for the chromosomes, and that's why you see transphobes harping on chromosomes as the determinants of sex, despite the fact that they don't even know what their chromosomes are. There is a solid chance, in fact, I would say there is almost 100% chance that at least some of the very, very, very vocal transphobes are actually sort of chromosomally intersex and have no idea.
It's more common than being ginger, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
If I met a ginger transphobe,
It's told me.
if we've got one ginger, one trans person, which one of us is intersex?
We're an incredibly unlikely podcast.
But my point is that ultimately there are many different ways that you could break down sex, and it just so happens that the transphobes are saying that the one that is the most important is the one that trans people can't change, and it also happens to be the one that literally no one ever knows about anyone ever.
I just why does any of this matter either? Like the fact that there's 2 biologists in a video arguing about what makes someone a woman? Why?
Well,
Who cares?
It seems like a strange
why does
thing,
it matter?
Because ultimately, pronouns and the way you refer to each other
Yeah.
is a social thing. It's about
It's all
Exactly.
social.
talking
That's
to each
why
other
none
and
of this
respecting each other.
None
and
of
then
this
you've
is based on
gone to
objective,
gametes in order to justify just using the wrong pronouns for people when they are more comfortable if you use the other pronoun.
Hello, miss. Oh my god, I'm so sorry. Your gametes are too small for me to call you that. Mr. Small Gametes over here.
Let me get out my gamete detector. What have you got?
It just kind of feels like, it's a very complex subject, and but it does feel like trying to find a reason to retain an old worldview that you just want to hold on to.
Oh, conservatism.
Yeah.
No, we
It's
need
just
to
like,
find a
we find
reason why we were
justification.
right in the first place,
Yeah.
and things shouldn't
And
change.
things shouldn't change.
It's
Yeah.
inherently reactionary.
Yeah.
Inherently.
But then you tell yourself that it's not.
Yeah.
You tell
Yeah,
yourself
yeah.
that, actually, I was saying Mr. and Mrs. because of the gametes all along.
There's a reason I'm
Okay.
preserving these silly things.
Okay, Ben Shapiro, I didn't realize you were joining us today. Seriously, if anyone says that pronouns are biological,
Smack 'em.
they're lying to themselves. And this is let's briefly just touch on the sort of science aspect. And we were talking about being reactionary and sort of making sort of the world fit this old, outdated model that you've got, and that kind of touches on it is simple, basic science aspect. And I want to just very briefly talk about this. I've spoken about it many times before. I want to very briefly just talk to the audience directly here. Hello, audience. If you are someone that is listening to this, and you have said before, it is basic science. It's high school biology. Can I just tell you, having studied biology in university, biotechnology at UCL, if anyone's going to try and have a go, biotechnology at UCL, biology is a lot more complex than you learned in high school, on many fronts.
Are you ready for advanced biology?
And if you're in your 30s or 40s, not only is biology more complex, our understanding of it has changed. And I can tell you that my understanding of biology, like the understanding of biology that we had when I was in university, was changing so rapidly that there were new things being added to the course as I started that my lecturers could not explain to me in full detail because, one, basically because we had only just discovered it and no one knew what the outcome of it was. Biology is one of those subjects that is nebulous and complex and almost constantly changing in our understanding of it as we learn more and more things. But one thing is absolutely certain. If you say it is basic biology to refute anything that trans people say to you about them being trans, you're a transphobe and you should shut up because you don't understand biology. Actually read a paper for once. Please, for the love of God, actually read a paper and stop trying to quote your high school biology teacher who told you about sex in the most simplistic way so that you could get it into your little 14-year-old brain.
So you could pass an exam.
Also,
Exactly.
Pluto was still a planet when I was in school.
Whoa. Hold on.
Pluto
It is
changed his gender.
very simple primary school it's primary school astronomy that Pluto is a planet.
Did you know that when you're in high school, they teach you that in chemistry that the electrons are in orbitals, and then it turns out the electrons aren't anywhere, and we don't know where they are, and we don't know how fast they're going.
It's even worse than that, because in high school they teach you that the electrons are in shells, and then they teach you that they are in orbitals, and then
they find out that we don't know where they are. We can only ever know where they are or how fast they're going. We can't ever know both.
But it's basic high school physics.
No, it's basic.
You should listen.
Basic stuff.
Even I get it.
And like what I want to say is, and this is one of my favorite ones to pull out as well, is that when someone says it's basic high school biology, I'm like, yeah, just like the Krebs cycle, right? Which is basically something that happens in respiration, and it gets incredibly more complex as you move out of high school. Mm-hmm. And this always stumps people, because when they're saying it's basic high school biology, they haven't actually studied biology, so they have no idea what I'm talking about. Yeah. And they fully have to admit, oh, yeah, maybe I shouldn't be using high school biology as the metric for whether I should treat this group of people kindly or not. Yeah. Sorry, science says that I'm allowed to be mean to gingers. It says so.
Because there's not very many of them.
It's basic high school biology, man.
That's okay.
They're very easy to pick on.
I know my place.
So those documents that we were going through a little bit earlier, the protocol documents, I think they're incredibly interesting. I think you should have a look at them, definitely. They're linked down in the description. There are some interesting bits in there. Here are some quotes. Gender dysphoria refers to discomfort or distress that is caused by a discrepancy between a person's gender identity and that person's sex assigned at birth, and the associated gender role and or primary and secondary sex characteristic. Trans and gender variant people are not necessarily gender dysphoric. This was from 2013. It was saying trans people don't necessarily have to have dysphoria.
Well before its time.
Yeah. Wow.
Is it? Have we got enough time for me to ask? How does that work?
I mean, I'm not the trans one. Noah?
Why are you just putting this on me?
Expert?
Why do you think we brought
you have a PhD in trans? Am I right?
I don't even know. I don't even know. I think it's all just like being trans is about identity, and it's not necessarily about ticking off lists. Right. I feel like it's an internal sense of identity. If you know yourself that you're a man, you know that you're a man.
Right.
Like you don't necessarily need to feel uncomfortable.
Yeah. Like I have like no experience like feeling like that, because my transition was entirely like motivated by dysphoria.
Yeah.
But like gender dysphoria and like being trans is about identity.
I think one of the reasons that this is brought up, at least from what I've read, is that because if trans kids and trans people in general are in supportive, accepting environments, there is less likelihood, and they've got the knowledge that they can get the changes that they want. They can see a life for themselves. They're less likely to have all of these additional issues, and so you can imagine that gender dysphoria is probably quite lessened to the point of almost not necessarily being diagnosable if you're in the correct environment with the correct track. But to get you to where you need to be.
Yeah, I also think it's worth like referencing the fact that like there is gender dysphoria in the terms of like, wow, I have boobs, I don't want boobs, they make me really upset. But there's also gender dysphoria as like, wow, when the class was told to split into girls and boys, I had to go into the girls part. So it's not just like there's physical dysphoria, there's like social dysphoria as well. And obviously a lot of the social dysphoria will be lessened if you're in an environment where your parents let you wear clothes that match up, match up with your gender. Like for instance, like when I was a kid, like I went into H&M, we'd just go to the boys section, I'd just wear boys clothes, I'd had like short hair, people assumed I was a boy, so I'm sure that if I wasn't in an environment where my parents were like that, like my social dysphoria would be a lot worse, whereas like luckily my physical dysphoria was so bad that like that was all I needed. Imagine if I just like didn't have that much physical dysphoria and my parents were like as good as they were. That would have been wonderful.
But and I think this is what's really interesting, and I want to say this to all the trans meds out there. Maybe actually read about how trans people are treated, the protocol for trans people and their healthcare in the UK. Because if you're going to say that being trans should be medicalized, maybe you should actually familiarize yourself with the medical literature on this, because it quite literally says, and I'll read it again for you: trans and gender variant people are not necessarily gender dysphoric. So if you use them like being medicalization of being trans as a reason that you need dysphoria to be trans, maybe make sure that the actual the medical field agrees with you on that one. Yeah, maybe do that first.
I might want to fight them.
I do want.
He wants to fight everyone.
Really
I'm sorry.
it
It really pisses me off when people make.
They assert that I do this because of science when it's completely, absolutely not because of science.
What a crusade you are!
Right? You're fighting for science while also simultaneously fighting against
doesn't need
science.
you to fight for it.
I'll be absolutely honest here.
There's a lot of scientists.
I did not know this before I read into this. Right, I didn't know that in 2013 there was that was being said in that sort of document. I find it really interesting, and I think that it's very interesting that, as you say, a lot of people that say that they're on the side of science have never actually opened an actual paper. They've never actually read past the abstract of a scientific paper.
The title.
Yeah, they and they might not even actually know how to properly read one, right?
And also, if you're on the side of science, well, I mean, a pretty fundamental thing about science is you try stuff and then you see if it works, and if it does, you infer. You try and infer sort of an explanation out of your initial hypothesis and your data, right? So if you have a situation where what your observed phenomena there are lots of people who are saying, I don't feel happy with my assigned gender, then you let them transition and live as their preferred gender.
Yeah.
And then they are happier. You can.
That's all you need,
You
really.
can infer something from that, which is that, okay, maybe they might have been right, or at least, even if you don't believe that they are right, you at least can infer that letting people transition to their preferred gender socially and possibly physically is an effective treatment for people feeling unhappy with their gender.
Yeah.
And it's the best treatment we have, as far as we know.
Well, look, you say that, but you're actually using you're using the affirmative care model. And what I would really like to tell you about is this other model that was made by people who focused primarily on people that detransition. And what we found by looking at the people that detransition is that the best thing to do is to not let people transition and instead just give them therapy to make them not trans.
Well, actually, the best thing to do is actually just be supportive of the trans people around you, because there are several studies that say that quite a lot of people detransition due to lack of social support rather than actually not being trans themselves. Like I went to the gender clinic maybe a few years ago and I spoke about it because I found it interesting, and like the woman that worked there was just like, yeah, we've had a lot of people come in, seek treatment from us, detransition, and then come back and said, yeah, I went through a time where I didn't have the support and was not able to continue my transition, and then they've come back and done it because they have more support.
I want to be clear that my last statement was facetious. It was very obviously facetious, but okay. I was being sarcastic.
That is okay. So you were being sarcastic.
Yeah.
Okay.
The affirmative care model is the best one. Evidentially, it's the best one. The people that come up and say we should actually just give trans people therapy into not wanting to transition, it sucks, and it's based on people that detransition. And as Noah has said, a lot of detransitioners, most detransitioners detransition because of poor sort of social support. And what we've said consistently throughout this is that from the youngest age, if you just support people, then they will probably be fine.
It's also like very self-explanatory. Like you could use it for literally anything. Like imagine you're a furry, you really like wearing furry outfits, and you're like, hey guys, I'm a furry. I really enjoy being a furry. I love taking part in the furry fandom. You go outside in a furry suit, you get bullied the hell out of.
No!
You're probably going to be like, oh, but guys, I'm not a furry.
But
Guys,
no,
I'm not a furry.
guys, I'm so confused here.
I was wrong about being a furry.
So, have you not noticed that like a lot of furries nowadays are depressed and hurt themselves? What is it about being a furry that makes people do that, huh? Like, what is it? Why are furries preying on these vulnerable people?
Yeah.
It's like it's just like so obvious, and like the only reason that people are so confused about it is because they're blinded by like reactionary people and like transphobia. Like it's very clear to see that, hey, this thing about my body makes me really upset. Oh well, maybe convince yourself that it doesn't. Maybe if you don't like your boobs, then just tell yourself that you do.
And look, to be honest, there is some confounding data in there. There are let's say differences of opinion. I think, however, when you look at the entire body of scientific data on this, the answer is fairly clear, and it's the answer that is the general consensus right now. I mean, it tells you something that most of the papers that seem to disagree with that sort of consensus are coming from people who have a specific and vested interest in changing the way that trans people live their lives, right?
Yeah.
And you could say, oh well, but maybe there's a pro-trans agenda. Like, if you are building your entire public persona, almost your entire life around this hatred of trans people, I think it's slightly different from people who are like, maybe we should make sure that these people are happy.
Yes.
The bias between let's make sure these people get the bare minimum of human sort of dignity, and the bias of I hate this group and I want to see them burn. I feel like there's varying levels there, okay? Varying levels.
Baddies?
If only they had that level of sort of self-awareness.
I do not.
Some other quotes from these sort of protocols that I find really interesting. The rationale for a period of living in the gender role that is congruent with an individual's gender identity before genital reassignment surgery, living in an identity congruent gender role, is based on expert clinical consensus that this experience provides ample opportunity for patients to experience and socially adjust in their desired gender role before undergoing irreversible surgery. And so what I've got here is my notes on this, that in this instance, you need to have come out to everyone for at least a year and present consistently day to day, which... Like that is
quite a high bar.
That's a high bar. And this is what I was saying, is that this would almost work in a perfect world where trans people were just accepted, right? Because by the time you got to the point where you were like old enough to do that, you would have already lived a year in that, and it would be fine.
It's so
but
ridiculous.
It doesn't work.
No,
it's so
it
broken.
doesn't. Because I literally, when I went to the child gender clinic, that was a question that they asked, like, are you living as a guy? And I was like, I live at a very conservative boarding school. It is not possible for me to come out and live real life experience like this. I just feel like it's more likely than not that trans people probably don't feel like they're able to have that experience before starting testosterone, because it's like there are so many things that could go wrong.
I mean, like this is. I mean,
we should make a little world for people to experience.
Transland.
I'd love
little
that.
Transland, and you go. I felt much more comfortable there. I will now go back to being a woman, which I don't want to do, and I look forward to going back to Transland. You go like 5 times, and if every time you feel better in Transland, then you get to transition.
Look, I think we just put you in charge of the NHS. Wait, how would you deal with depression? How do you tackle that?
Happy Land?
Ooh, Happy Land. I don't think being depressed and being trans are the same thing.
No.
So we won't make it Depressy Land.
It's also, I just feel like it's like so much easier to treat trans people than it is to treat depressed people.
Well,
because
trans people generally want to be treated.
Yeah, there's a very clear. There's like a very clear pathway to take.
Yeah, we generally know how like treating trans people works, right? We're treating people with depression. It's very much like, okay, we'll throw a bunch of drugs at you and a bunch of different therapies at you, and let's hope that some of them stick. With trans people, it's like, so do you want to get rid of those boobies, or you keeping them? What's the deal there?
It's so weird. It's because it's just like if you had like some growth on your leg that like was just causing you a lot of pain, you really didn't like it. a doctor wouldn't be like, oh, but does it really hurt? Should we wait and see how much?
What if
it
you
hurts?
regret it?
Should we? You're right. Like you might
get-
want that. You don't want the scars.
You can get cosmetic surgery for moles and stuff,
Right.
for like blemishes. So that was, I kind of wanted to talk about that. Obviously, like the sort of the limitations of these protocols. I think are really good in some aspects, and I want to be clear: it's the protocols, not the system itself. The protocols are just the words on a page saying, "Here's how we should do it." How that's then actually implemented and how that works on a grand scale with as many people trying to access it as there are now, those are different things. But some parts of the protocol are pretty solid, and then other parts like this are like, this doesn't work in real life. Like this assumes that it's very easy for a trans person to live in their gender for a year. When like, come on, are you kidding me? Like, have you ever actually spoken to sort of trans people when you're making these sort of guidelines? And then there's another one which I thought was interesting. Full discussion of fertility issues, including the possibility of gamete storage, should precede endocrine treatment. So that's preceding hormone treatment. And I want to bring this up because a really common thing coming from TERFs and other transphobes is they are sterilizing kids. One, no, they're not. Just right off the bat, no, they're not.
Yeah.
No, they're not. Two, even in the cases wherein hormone treatment can make you sterilized, which again, the word choice here, you got to pay attention to people's word choice. In cases where hormone treatment affects your fertility, in trans guys, a lot of cases they want that because being fertile as a trans man involves something that you don't want every month. So that's probably a good thing for them. And ultimately, with trans women, if they are going to go through the full surgeries, if they're going to get bottom surgery, then fertility is something that's kind of out the window at that point.
Yeah.
So it really bugs me that there's this whole issue, there's this whole like sort of thing that's brought up by TERFs and other transphobes that they're sterilizing kids, or they're making kids infertile, when like you need to have a full discussion of this along with gamete storage before that. And also, it's not even like a 100% thing wherein taking hormones will sterilize you. Like that's not 100%. You know what I mean? It is the number of think about the number of stories of trans guys that have come off of HRT for a bit in order to be pregnant.
Yeah.
Like it's so incredibly frustrating, and it's literally in the protocols here a full discussion of fertility issues, and like you had that, right?
God, yeah. Well, it's the kind of thing where just like every time a transphobe is just like, oh, what about this? They didn't consider this. Every single assessment that I've had has been like so detailed. It's like disgusting. The amount of questions they ask you, like I was asked, have I considered living in a masculine female role instead of living as a guy? Like, maybe you're just a tomboy. Have you considered that? Like, they cover all bases, and like I left the appointment at the kids clinic and I like cried because I was like, yeah, I do want my eggs frozen, because they have to bring up literally everything.
And I think that like it makes sense a little bit how this sort of transphobe view sort of manifests when you realize that these aren't generally people that are going through this process themselves, right? These are people who are either parents of these people, of like, of kids who aren't necessarily going to be all of these things, and hear it secondhand and think, oh my God, what are they doing to my kid, right? It's coming from like this not even sort of first-hand understanding, or it's coming from people who just generally find trans people icky and have never engaged with any of this stuff, and so we're just making baseless assumptions.
Yeah.
Like, read through the protocol. Please read through the protocol and then come up with your issues with it then, because so many, as Noah said, so many of these concerns are actually just, they are brought up in the actual sort of treatment plan. That kind of covers the treatment and all of that sort of stuff. And I want to quickly just talk about what causes gender dysphoria.
Okay.
100 points to anyone that tells me what causes gender dysphoria.
We don't know.
Yeah.
100 points.
Is that 50 each or 100 each?
100 each.
Yay!
So yeah, we don't know. I was really hesitant to do this in this episode because I know that the science surrounding this topic is anything but definite.
Yeah.
By which I mean we've not obviously come to any major conclusions on this. And there's a lot of misinformation flying around, and there's people often repeat hypotheses as sort of actual fact, and it really sort of muddies the waters. I've got a bunch of quotes that basically just say we don't understand what it is. I mean, I've got a quote here from I think it's a book on gender dysphoria, saying the etiology, the cause of gender dysphoria, remains unclear, but it's thought to originate from a complex biopsychosocial link. So
it's everything.
Yeah, everything.
We also, crucially, we don't fully understand how anybody forms a sense of self,
Yeah.
Right?
let alone a trans person. We don't know how anybody, like, it's very complicated the way that we form our identity, like biologically. We don't know how anybody does that.
But
So-
no, it's because you let your daughter get a short haircut.
Well, I think this is the thing: is that I think people generally
Let them watch NoahFinnce on YouTube.
it's quite a weird thing to you. Maybe it's too much to get into, but it's quite a weird thing that you are like a system, and then your brain is then creating a self
Yeah.
in order to model its outside, which I think is one of the prevailing views.
Yeah.
So we don't even know what we are. We don't
Yeah.
know how we're conscious. We don't know how we are experiencing things.
Yeah.
We don't know how we form identity. We know that a decent chunk of how we form identity is not in our conscious control whatsoever.
Yeah.
We know that we don't really have much control over what we want to do or what we like.
So why are we trying to explain these very concept? Like, we're trying to find answers to things that maybe just don't have answers.
I mean, I think ultimately, right, this is something we talk about often. Is it more likely that there is one specific thing that transes you? Or is there maybe like a complex number of different things, different factors that could result in someone
The
being
left.
trans?
It's the left.
The one.
As the neoliberals.
So how did we get
Explain
to
that,
so how did we
Caitlyn
get Caitlyn Jenner? But I think what is interesting is that, and this is, bear in mind that there are intersex people that can be trans, and a part of that is like due to sort of forcing intersex kids to be one or the other from birth, and then kind of guessing wrong. Yeah, which, and this is why I bring up intersex people in this conversation a lot, because coincidentally, a number of things that could help trans people could also help intersex people, and vice versa. And obviously, intersex people deserve their own voices in their own space, and I don't want to lump them entirely into this conversation, but I think it is worth mentioning that by not imposing such strict sort of, you need to be a boy or a girl from birth, we need to raise you as a boy, and boys do this and girls do that. By kind of removing that, you help a lot of different groups of people.
Yeah.
So, for example, you help gay boys and girls, queer boys and girls who don't necessarily conform to gender roles. You help gender non-conforming people who aren't necessarily trans. You help intersex people, because you probably wouldn't have those horribly invasive and potentially mutilating surgeries that are done without consent on babies.
You also help people that just are not gender non-conforming. Like, by forcing any role on anybody, you're forcing them into a route that maybe they wouldn't have necessarily taken if they weren't told that that's what they should be doing.
Absolutely. I mean, the number of people that I know, that I've spoken to, that are that live in places that are, small towns and whatnot, that they can't be who they are in some sense or another, because of the strict sort of idea of what they should be that is imposed on them.
It was like you didn't even want to wear nail varnish to your work, because you thought people would make comments about it.
And that's the thing. It's not even and I get comments on. I was literally in a conversation about this last night. There was someone that was saying, you're clearly insecure. You're wearing nail polish, and I'm like, no, I think it looks cool. And then he was like, it looks stupid, and I'm like, you misunderstand. I don't give a shit what you think. I think it looks cool. That has been the case with me for a while. Yeah, I know, right?
I know that's where you get yourself.
See, I don't derive my self-worth from what some stranger online thinks about my appearance.
Yeah.
I wear things that I think. But
People are so weird.
insane. But my
There
point
is no
is that.
such thing as looking cool objectively. Anyway, what are you on about?
Whoa, Luke. I'm right here. You look pretty cool. Objectively pretty cool. But I
don't
wouldn't
think you
wear.
do.
I wouldn't want to wear nail. I don't
I
care
want
what
you
you
to
think.
respect that.
I wouldn't want to wear nail polish into work when I was working in an office, and it wasn't so much because I was necessarily embarrassed or any of those things. It was strictly for simplifying my life, because I didn't enjoy going to that place.
Yes.
I didn't enjoy speaking to a number of the people that were there.
Those people?
And by wearing nail polish, I would then have to have a number of conversations that I just don't want to have.
Yeah.
It is easier for
You
me.
gay?
Well, yeah, it's
Are
easier
you
for
gay
me to.
for that? You're gay.
And it's like or jokes about it, and it's not even like the jokes
Yeah.
would bother me.
Okay.
It's more the fact that I'm just like,
It's not
this is
funny.
increasing the social interaction that I have to have with you.
Yeah.
And gonna have to prompt conversations that I just don't want to have. It is easier
Yes.
for me to not look like my coolest if I can just not have these
Easier if I don't
conversations.
look sick as hell.
Right, like genuinely, because like I don't like you know me, I don't really care that much what other people think. It's just if I have to see you every day, I'm gonna change how I am because it just makes my life easier.
Yeah, because I don't want to talk to you.
Because I can't be bothered talking about it. I can't be bothered. I don't want to educate you on like I can't be bothered. I cannot be bothered. And you're absolutely right there. Like if we were to remove so many of these expectations, everyone would probably be a lot happier. So many people.
Yeah.
So, I mean, when we're talking about sort of what causes gender dysphoria, and I didn't want to like sort of skip over this because I assume that's why people wanted this episode, but I have to be honest, we don't know. We could talk about male and female brains. I want to do an entire episode on that because I was trying to look into the male versus female brains thing. There's so much research. There's so much research on this. I've seen places saying that there are definite differences between male and female brains. I've seen places saying that there aren't definite differences between male and female brains, and part of it is socialization. I've heard people saying that the socialization has some effect, but actually there are inherent differences, and you can see those differences in sort of monkeys and whatnot. I don't know yet. I don't know. I need to sit down and read for a week on this specific topic. And there are the studies that have shown that trans people have brains that seem more similar to the brains of let's say if you're a trans man, then it'd be more similar to sort of a male typical brain and vice versa. There's all of that. There is so much going on. There's also the idea of, I think, increased testosterone sort of differences in sort of sensitivity to testosterone in the womb, potentially affecting sort of gender identity later in life. There are so many things that can cause gender dysphoria, and I think what we need to do is we need to pull our heads out of this idea that there is one cause for any of these things. There's no one cause for being gay, probably. There's probably no one cause for being trans, because trans people are diverse and varied, and not all of them have gender dysphoria necessarily, and not everyone with gender dysphoria necessarily is trans, and there are so many different things. It's like saying, oh, why are you depressed? Like, oh, well, I'm depressed.
We need to find the reason.
I'm depressed
What is
because
it?
I dropped my
You haven't
cat
been
off of
depressed, man.
a 30-story building. And like, yeah, no, very, very
What?
sad.
Did everyone
And,
do that?
and
with
I'm
depression?
depressed because I sat on a cake. Those are like two different reasons.
Everybody who sits on cake must be depressed.
It's two very different reasons to be depressed, right? But like if you go around saying, yes, this one person is depressed because they sat on a cake, everyone is depressed because he sat on cakes. It doesn't quite work.
But
right?
it's like, maybe there just isn't a reason. Maybe that's just how it is.
I mean,
maybe some people are just like that.
okay, I think you're then getting into like, I think this is then a discussion about like, what is the reason? I mean, I think maybe there's not a sort of reason, that we want, like a story, but there is a pathway to that. And maybe it's so complex that it's different for every person. I didn't want to skip over this, but we don't know. I could talk about all of the different theories and whatnot, but like that'd really be a whole episode to itself. And it wouldn't be, I don't think it'd be as interesting, because it'd just be, oh, we think this, but we're not sure. Oh, we think that, but we're not sure.
Yeah.
You know? And ultimately, does it hugely matter necessarily? I think it's interesting, but as soon as you find out the reason that, like one way that people can be trans, all you're going to do is make people sort of start trying to stop trans people from existing.
Or
Yeah.
In a
people
number of
who
different ways.
are saying they're trans and don't have that thing, and then they're like,
Being
so
invalidated.
you're not trans.
Yeah.
It's also the kind of thing that like finding a reason doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be able to fix the problem. Like even in like therapy, I'm just like, oh, why am I like this? He's like, maybe it's because of this. That doesn't necessarily mean that just because I'm aware of why I have this thing, that it means that I'm going to be able to cure it just because I'm aware of it.
Yeah.
And I think the last thing I wanted to talk about, moving past all of the sort of actual sort of biological and social causes of gender dysphoria, is sort of the medicalization of transness. And I try to avoid in my notes, if you were to see my notes for this episode, trans people are mentioned incredibly sparingly. Because I didn't want to do this episode on trans people, I want to do this episode on gender dysphoria. And yeah, those are like sort of largely the same sort of thing, but not necessarily in all instances. And I think by conflating gender dysphoria, the thing that's in the DSM-5, the thing that grew from the DSM-4's definition of gender identity disorder, like that's what it was in the DSM-4, gender identity disorder. you're then medicalizing transness, right? You're then saying that being trans is a mental illness. And here's a quote from the Gender Identity Clinic. The majority of appointments for patients will be with gender specialists, clinicians who may have a background in psychology or psychiatry, although we don't view gender identity issues as mental illness. Because, like, you can say that they are, and if it brings you comfort to think that you're mentally ill, and that's the problem, that's fine. You can do that. When you start trying to apply that to other people, that's when you're running into problems, right? Like, I feel like right now, because the only way that trans people can access the healthcare that they need to sort of live comfortably is through the health, like the sort of medical field, through those health services. Transness has necessarily become medicalized, and I was curious what you guys thought about that.
I just think it's interesting because it's like I'm mentally ill, but not because I'm trans.
Right, and I think that's. I mean, no, it comes into the autism thing as well, though, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Like the sort of the fact that, like, you know, a lot of autistic people have. We spoke about this in the autism episode a few weeks ago. That a lot of autistic people have these sort of comorbidities with sort of depression and anxiety, and you can say the same for ADHD and all of these things. Maybe it's because of the way that society treats these people, right? Like, I feel like you probably see trans people being a lot more mentally healthy if they weren't faced with a society that is so incredibly hostile to them at all times.
Yeah.
You know? So I think that's probably about it for this week. It's a bit of a long one, isn't it?
Yes.
Bit of a long one. But one more thing to do before we go.
Ooh.
It's a quick fire quiz.
Dun 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 dun. Gender Dysphoria edition.
So the rules for the quick fire quiz are the same as always. I'll ask one question. That's one question between the three of you. The first person to buzz in with the correct answer after I finish asking the question wins. What do they win, Jamp?
Gender Dysphoria. No, nothing.
I just got rid of that.
No!
Well, you better not win. Luke, what is your buzzer? Jamp, what is your buzzer?
Ooh.
Now, Noah, you need to do a non-binary sound. What is your buzzer?
That's going to be my answer anyway.
Okay. So the question is, what was gender dysphoria called in the DSM-4? Oh, Noah, you got there first.
Definitely wasn't.
Gender identity disorder.
Ding, ding, ding. That is correct.
You get gender dysphoria.
How does it feel with your new prize?
Oh, I gotta get my tits back.
Oh, no. Another waiting list.
Wow, that is it. 3 years of Sci Guys.
Ew, that's
Wow.
Incredible. 3 whole years. Think of the number of different places we've moved between, like so many different studios.
Yeah.
Almost all of them in a place that Noah lives, which is very weird.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
He is
At
the
some
fifth Sci
point.
guy.
Yeah,
The
at some
fifth Sci
point.
Guy.
Stop saying fifth.
You're the fifth Sci Guy.
4 of us.
No, there's the 3
No.
of us, and you're the 5th.
Yeah.
It's very simple.
Can you not count?
I'm being gaslit right now.
How about this? You can stop complaining about being the 5th Sci Guy, and we will let you thank some of our patrons.
Okay.
Now it's time to thank our patrons, just the new patrons for this month. If you want to be thanked next month, you could head to our Patreon at patreon.com/Sci Guys and sign up there. You could also get a whole bunch of other perks like bonus videos, a whole bonus podcast. You get to watch our live show, Sci Guys Live, whenever you like. And there's plenty of other things there too. So why don't we start thanking them? I want to say thank you to Max.
Thank you, Danito.
Thank you, Kaylee Stone.
Thank you, Grieve One.
Thank you, Nikos Patrick.
Thank you, Shannon Warland.
Thank you, Jack McClare.
Thank you, Phoebe Morgan.
Thank you, RKM.
Thank you, Kelly Bowling.
Kelly Bowling. Thank you, Nub is Nebula.
And thank you, Megan Serper.
Wow.
Nubis.
What?
Nubis.
Nubis Nebula. But also Nub is Nebula.
No,
Nub
it is Nebula.
is Nebula.
I thought it was Karen Gillan, but turns out it's Nub.
It's Nub.
It's
It was
Nub.
Nub all along.
Well, that is it for this week, and that is it for the 3rd year of Sci
I was going to
Guys.
say that's it for Sci Guys.
Well, that's it for Sci Guys. Well, no, that's
Goodbye.
not even the 3rd year of Sci Guys. Sci Guys, it's is it not the 4th year?
The beginning of
We're
the
going
fourth
into
year.
the
Beginning of the 4th.
We're going into the 4th.
Well, let's say hello to the 4th year of Sci Guys, which we are starting right now.
Hello.
Very incredible.
Wow.
Very cool. So let's hope we have 3 more years. Maybe 3 years after that. maybe another 2 years after that, and 1 year after that, and then we stop.
Oh God.
I feel so old.
Gosh.
How
How many kids will Luke have by then?
When we die, our children shall replace us on Sci Guys.
That would be cool. I'd like that.
That would be cool to be.
So, before we go, we'd like to thank all of our patrons with a very special thank you to executive producers Danito and Rosa Rodriguez. And thank you for watching. You can find the full references for this episode in the description. Subscribe for new episodes every Sunday, and why not leave us a nice wee comment? You can support the pod at patreon.com/Sci Guys, or you can find and contact us at Sci Guys Pod on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and here on YouTube, and at Sci Guys on TikTok too. Or you can send us an email at sciguyspod@gmail.com.
That's sciguyspod@gmail.com.
Sci Guys Pod.
At gmail.com. You can follow me at Not Corey everywhere.
You can follow me at Jampkin everywhere.
You can follow me at Luke Cutforth everywhere.
You can follow me at NoahFinnce, except on Twitter where I'm NoahFinnAdams, and TikTok where I'm the NoahFinnce.
You should get just one username, shouldn't you?
Yeah, I know. Someone took no offense.
Buy it.
Goodbye.
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 Goodbye.